Tom Quee presents The Royle Ramble, an episode-by-episode celebration of the classic British sitcom, The Royle Family. To get in touch with the show, email us at theroyleramblepod@gmail.com. Hello everyone, it's Tom Quee here, host of The Royle Ramble. I hope you're well, I hope you've had your teas and all that jazz. And yes, we are back for another super in-depth exploration of an episode of The Royle Family, Joe's Crackers to be precise. And as you can tell by the runtime, we have a lot to talk about today, so I'll keep this intro as quick as possible. And the first thing I want to say is just thank you to everyone for listening to the show. You know, we had a hiatus of almost 2 years, we came back with the Golden Egg Cup, and the numbers have been great. You know, the feedback's been awesome. We've been in the top 5 on the iTunes chart in terms of TV and film reviews, and top 10s around the world in Australia and Japan and Ireland, and you know, that's just been wild for me to see. So yeah, cheers again for that. Of course, if you want to support the show and you want to give back, there's so many ways you can do that. You can leave us a review on iTunes. You can tell your friends, your fellow Royle Family obsessives about the show. We're on YouTube as well. We're on Twitter. All the links down below. And if you want to go even further, you can support us on Patreon. And, you know, I'm overjoyed that many people have already done that. And I am making it worth your while over there because, as I announced in the last episode, alongside the Royle Ramble, I am doing the Grapes tapes. So I'm doing an in-depth exploration of early doors alongside the Royle Family, and at the time of this going live, there are now 2 episodes live, so I've covered the first and the second episode of Early Doors, and that is available exclusively on Patreon. And if you go support over there, you can download it like a normal podcast. You can use the Patreon app. It's very, very easy. It slots in seamlessly to any of your listening habits, and yeah, huge thanks to those who have supported so far. So I want to give a shout out to Rachel, to Luke, to Daniel, to Lorcan, to Rebecca, to Dan OG, and to RKs. Thank you for supporting the Royle Ramble and for listening to the Grapes tapes. And I also put stuff on there a little bit ahead of time. So I think the schedule I'm going to be running with the Royle Ramble is every 2 weeks. I'll be dropping something on the feed. So in 2 weeks' time, my interview with Steve Bendelak will be on the main feed. That's available on Patreon now. You can watch the full video, listen to the full audio. Steve Bendelak, if you're not familiar, he is quite an iconic figure, really, in the history of British TV comedy. Not only is he one of the masterminds behind Spitting Image, directed the majority of those episodes, he did the first 3 series of Buzzcocks, he did The League of Gentlemen, he did Little Britain, he did Mighty Boosh, and he also did Series 2 of The Royle Family. He did all 7 of those episodes. And the chat we had, I mean, you guys are going to love this. We basically spent a whole hour speaking about his time on The Royle Family and the amount of stories that he shares and anecdotes and insights. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that I was actually hearing this, and I was so happy it went so well, and I think you're going to get a real kick out of it. So if you just can't wait for that, and you also want to hear the Grapes tapes right now, you can get access to that on the Patreon. Go support us over there. And finally, if you want to give back to the show, I would love to hear from you. Please email in theroyleramblepod@gmail.com, and just let me know your thoughts on my thoughts, your thoughts on the episodes that I've discussed. And we've got some great emails to get through as well. So just to remind you, that's theroyleramblepod@gmail.com. And here's our first email. And it comes from Lorcan, and he begins, "Hi Tom, it's Lorcan here from Ireland. I nearly crashed my Land Cruiser this morning when I saw the notification popping up about a new Royle Family episode. I thought you were dead, pal." The Golden Egg Cup episode is a strange one. I think by the time Craig and Carolyn wrote this episode, it was just about having a laugh and not taking it too seriously. And then Lorcan also mentions the Grapes tapes here, Early Doors, saying, "I think if you look at the Early Doors set, the set upstairs, you'll find that most of the stuff looks like it came from the Royle Family set. The wallpaper on the wall I'm nearly sure is the same as the Royals, and the set just looks so familiar. In my love of the Royle Family show, when I see Craig Cash and the Grapes, it's just Dave and the Feathers having a pint, and I long to see Denise walk through the door, but she never does, and that makes me sad. If you look at Ken pouring a pint of beer, God, it's so bad. I wonder, did he have lessons before the show started filming? I bet he didn't. When he pours a pint of Guinness, it's awful. It looks like slop. Also, if you read the credits of Early Doors at the end, they thank various people like Peter Kay and Karen Ahern. I wonder what they were thanking her for. Anyway, keep up the good work, Tom. Talk soon, Lorcan." Well, thank you so much, Lorcan, for the email. And yes, sorry that I endangered your life there, bringing back the Royle Ramble. It was a shock, you know, it's a shock for a lot of people. But yeah, the thank yous that you mentioned at the end. So Carolyn Aherne was supposed to be part of Early Doors back in the day. I believe Early Doors was supposed to be more of like a street of various different businesses, and she was going to be the landlady. And John Henshaw's actually made reference to this as well in an interview that I've heard, like he had ran into Carolyn Aherne beforehand, but obviously that never came to be. And Carolyn, had her own issues quite famously and left for Australia around this time and did Dosser and Joe, which is still a show that I've never watched. I'll definitely have to cover that one day on the series. But I think she was still kind of, a creative collaborator early on and, a huge part of Early Doors, the spirit of Early Doors, the feel of Early Doors, of course. So it makes sense why she was thanked. As for Peter Kay, I think I've heard Phil Mealy speak about on the To the Regiment podcast about how Peter Kay was quite important in getting the show commissioned and, being someone that was backing it. And I think he wrote something on one of the walls in the bar, or again, I'll have to go back and check the notes there. But yeah, I mean, you would expect Carolyn Aherne to be thanked there, but it is intriguing that Peter Kay is thanked too. And our next email comes from Jack, and he says, "Hi Tom, love the episode. I had it on during work yesterday. I love some of the observations and had such a palpable image of the septic testicle. Oddly, I checked out Big Top off the back of it. I mean, I mentioned Big Top, the Amanda Holden, one of the worst sitcoms ever made. That sitcom gets referenced, obviously, in the Golden Egg Cup. I checked out Big Top off the back of it. Another one of those crazy castings that have some top names, though, as you say, it was literally just when the whistle blows. You keep your good-natured spirit in the podcast, and it made me enjoy the episode more than I did with the actual show. Now, I might have missed this from previous podcasts, or maybe it's because it's pre-edited, but I really enjoy how much you swore in it. Now, that may make me sound Route 1, but the term bollock really did tickle me. Anyway, speak soon, friend. And yes, thank you, Jack. Sorry that listening to the episode made you check off Big Top. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy there. And I think I did swear in previous episodes, but maybe I'm just getting more irascible as I get older. I'm not sure. But I mentioned this on the Grapes tapes, actually. Like, has the word fuck ever been said in the Royal Family or Early Doors? I'm pretty sure not. I mean, they invoke some horrendous images and ideas in the show. Horrendous in a comedic way, but still. But why hasn't Jim ever said the F-bomb? Like, you would have thought he would have dropped that multiple times, fuck my arse or something. I don't quite know the context of him saying that. That's kind of wrong to say out of context. But yeah, is there any swearing on the Royal Family or Early Doors? Let me know, the royalramblepod@gmail.com, but I'm pretty sure there fucking isn't. Okay, and our penultimate email comes from Andres, and Andre is, a good friend of the show, emailed in many, many times back in the original run. He says, "Hi Tom, great to hear from you again. I've just listened to the full episode, and I'm glad you're still keeping up with the Simpsons references with there's no Kane in Citizen Kane and everything's coming up Millhouse. I have to say that I'd only ever seen the Golden Egg Cup just the once when it was originally broadcast, and never again since, with my Royal Family box set stopping at the new sofa, so I didn't recall any of the jokes really. And listening to all the clips, it's apparent that the Golden Age was well and truly over. Still, some good quips in there, especially the cheeky Lily Allen Nepo baby jab. I wonder if she regretted licensing LDN to be used after that joke. And Joe's Crackers is an episode I don't think I've ever seen, but I'm eager to hear your recap on that one anyway. I also enjoyed you bringing up the brilliant The One Show podcast, which I devoured a few years ago. I especially loved their recurring bit where they counted just how often one of the hosts asks a guest, what was that like? I can officially confirm also that that's the #1 most asked question on any Flemish light entertainment chat show. Best of luck with all the future episodes, and talk to you soon, Andres." And yeah, so good to hear from you, sir. And yeah, you mentioned the Lily Allen thing. I mean, just as I've recording this, Lily Allen's at the centre of, I wouldn't call it a storm really, but she's basically selling pictures of her feet to make money. She's saying she makes more money off that than Spotify, and power to you. So for that reason alone, I don't think she really would have minded about the LDM thing. And our final email sent into the royalramblepod@gmail.com comes from Stevie. He says, "Hi Tom, this is a great podcast episode about, in my opinion, a mediocre Royal Family episode. I totally agree that it feels like some things are out of place. Jim being a fan of the very saccharine The One Show. Cheryl not having too much to say about Mary. I was going to say the same about Anthony agreeing to pull the 520 quid between him and Denise as a gift, but actually thinking about it, I think that's probably very realistic. Anthony recognises he's a lot wealthier than the rest of his family and will want to help them out where he can, even if he's treated like a skivvy. And Denise would also absolutely want to take advantage of that. I remember watching this when it was first broadcast. I wasn't particularly impressed at the time, and now that I've been able to watch the full show back to back, it's even more obvious that it's not the same as it used to be up to and prior to The Queen of Sheba. I wanted to tell you as well that you've been very influential with my watching habits recently. I've bought and watched the entirety of Mrs. Merton and Malcolm. It's tremendous, and absolutely nowhere near as dark as the critics made out at the time. I think it was their attempt at a semi-wholesome sitcom, but Ahern and Cash have an irreverent edge, which adds a certain something that probably doesn't sit right with most people. Sorry, I've probably gone on too long. Best go get me lunch. It's a cup of soup, but with a twist. Keep up the amazing podcast work, Tom. You're doing a tremendous job, Stevie. Well, thank you, Stevie. I'm blushing here. Completely agree with you agreeing with me about the Golden Egg Cup. Yeah, a lot of things were off there. Why did Jim like the one show? I can stand everything else, but that I'm just like, if Jim was a cyborg, if it came back and Jim was just like a Terminator's type fixture, that would be more believable to me than the one show and him being a fan of it. And great as well to hear that you're a fan of Mrs. Merton and Malcolm. Yeah, as I've discussed in previous episodes, I haven't actually done a recap of that yet. I'm doing the Royle Family now, and then on the main feed, I'm going to move on to the Mrs. Merton show. And then I also, after that, will do Mrs. Merton and Malcolm. But yeah, it's very baffling to me that it received such raw criticism. I think it's actually quite a brilliant show, like, you know, and it is dark, you know, it does lean into certain things. It can be quite wholesome as well as it having quite a barbed edge. It's quite a unique flavour. But yeah, if anyone hasn't watched this, and I think most people haven't, I think probably more people know that Craig Cash did early doors after the Royle Family, and a lot of people don't seem to know that, than they know that Craig and Caroline, in the break between Series 1 and Series 2 of the Royle Family, along with Henry Normal, did another 6-episode run of a written family sitcom. But yeah, shout out to the 4 listeners there getting in touch. That's the royalramblepod@gmail.com. Please do email me there. Let me know your thoughts on the Golden Egg Cup, on Joe's Crackers, on anything to do with Royle Family, really. Your history with the show. Like, I love hearing that sort of stuff as well. Your treasured memories, your favourite episodes. Your run-ins with the cast. You know, maybe you met Sue Johnston in Argos in 2004 or whatever. I want to hear about that, so please get in touch with me. And again, just a quick reminder that the Patreon is available there. If you enjoy what I'm doing on the Royle Family and you want to hear my long-form thoughts on early doors and also get early access to my in-depth interviews with people associated with the show, such as Steve Bendelak, who directed all of Series 2, go support there. Greatly appreciated. So anyway, let's get into it. This is Joe's Crackers, written by Carolyn Ahern, Craig Cash and Phil Mealy, and directed by Carolyn Ahern. And it debuted on the 25th of December, 2010. Okay, and we're in 2010 now. It's Christmas time with a Christmas special, like an actual Christmas special after the staycation woes of the Golden Egg Cup. It's the same title screen. It's the same opening sequence, of course. Thank God that they never updated that. You know, even though the screen grabs are somewhat out of date now at this point in time in Royle Family history, it's still literally perfect in every way. So we fade from that into Joe's Crackers as the title. An interesting title. Again, a bit like Citizen Kane, as I've mentioned. There's no crackers in Joe's Crackers, but we're going to work out soon enough why it's called that. We see the writers too. We've got the great Phil Mealy again joining Caroline and Craig. And the first shot sits us up squarely in front of the dirtied soul of our fave patriarch, Jim. His big toe is bandaged with a thick mummy swaddling, and it's beside 4, quite frankly, very stubby toes next to the big toe. Like, I'm not trying to body shame Ricky Tomlinson or anything here, but I paused the screen when I was making these notes and I checked my foot against Jim's, and yeah, it really looks like all of his little piggies have gone to the precinct or something. They're tiddly. So here we are on terra firma from the off, and we aren't moving either as we pull out and we see Jim's arms splayed on his big old belly. The house a blur of disordered mess behind him. Lots of chocolate boxes can be spotted. Shrinkflation be damned. And it is great how they open here with Jim's broken toe, as if to say, don't worry, there's no caravanning or trips out in any way in this episode. We are strictly within these 4 walls. At first, he's just patiently, attentively watching TV as it plays loudly. It's kind of hard to make out what it is exactly at first. The camera then pans out as Barb says the first line of the episode, the bauble won't stay on. And Jim's first line, well, I don't need to tell you, do I?
Oh, bauble my ass.
Bauble my arse. You know, he goes straight in with it. It's not the best, my arse, and, you know, it's perhaps a little alarming that he reels off the trusty catchphrase so quick. But I will say that this episode, Joe's Crackers, is a really good episode of TV. You know, it is a bit of a return to form, and maybe that's why the my arse came in so quickly here, you know, just to assure people that they're not playing with the formula too much here. So Barb eventually manages to get the bauble on there, has a victorious little gasp and steps back. More of the room becoming open to us now, and we can see that in the back the wallpaper is still peeled away from where we saw it in decorating, though it seems like another Paleozoic layer has been stripped off from the old days. We can also see tinsel wrapped around a lampshade higher up on a shelf, and beneath that a Lake District-esque, quasi-constable style work. We didn't really see much of this side of the room in the last two specials, so it's interesting what you can spot. Barb is preoccupied with the tree though. Barb, who's wearing a nice pink fleece, glasses on a necklace around her neck, looking as radiant as Jim is slovenly.
I'm not sure this tree's right for this room.
Of course it is. Twiggy got it especially for us.
Yeah.
So we're all very close up to the characters, to the room in these opening moments. Jim says, of course it is though, and then boom, we're behind him and Barb, where the dining table is. And here we can appreciate the Christmas tree in its full glory, its full aggressively floppy glory. Like, it's a lovely tree, no doubt, from Twiggy, but, Twig being Twig, we can see that it's a few feet too big for the royal living room and is in fact stooping over steeply and the top of it leaning forward a few feet into the room rather than ending cutely with an angel on its apex. It's probably the most surreal image in the history of the show. I mean, I know we've seen Dave shaving with the turkey in the bath and all, but just seeing this huge, monolithic omphalos towering over Barb, and even more so over Jim behind her, feet up in the seat, it's just such a funny transition, really. A proper thwack of absurdity for a second. Made even more the ridiculous by the fact that the top of the tree that is bending under great pressure under the roof. This section seems to have been as decorated as carefully as any of the normal sections that are just standing. Like, I suppose Barb would have gotten a chair to do this, like she did the decorations in Anthony's birthday. Like, it's mad that she went to this effort. It's fun as well that when it pans out to the shot where we can actually appreciate the tree in all its dilapidated majesty, we can also see the word joy in red letters with a Santa atop behind the TV. The TV, which is showing a woman speak on what seems to be a game show, but it's kind of hard to decipher at this early moment. Twiggy got it especially for us, Jim says, and Barb says, yeah, but it's hardly bespoke, isn't it? I mean, Twiggy knows the size of the living room. He knows this is a type of tree for a certain type of lounge, one of, proper privilege. It ain't for this homestead that he clearly dearly loves, where he's many times ate any old shite in, be it with Norma in that legendary season 2 episode, or as recollected in the previous Christmas special, the Golden Egg Cup, when he brought one of his Thai brides around. If only to deal with the Royals' privets. So Barb just kind of agrees with this, shrugs it off, and then moves towards the decorations, and there she is, in full splendour. And I love that they include this. It's the Norma bauble that we've seen before. Barb holds it up and says, we all do when we watch the episode in unison with her. I love that Norma's included here. Barb gives a kiss to the bauble kindly, and Jim actually smiles along. Then asks when he's going to get a kiss on his baubles, Barb. It's kind of there on a plate, really, but you understand why Jim would say it. All Barb can say, though, is a reflexive, "Oh, Jim." And then she says that the lights on the Leaning Tower of Christmas aren't working. Jim reckons she hasn't even gotten plugged in right, encouraging her to stick her tongue in the socket and test the voltage. Barb says every year is the same with these lights. The same palaver, which is such a great word. Barb wants new ones now, but Jim says how can they with the political state that they're in? And I love how they do this. They always set these markers in the episodes that crystallise them over time. We had the credit crunch being mentioned before, 5p bags, Barack Obama was one of the people written on the heads in the caravan when they were playing that guessing game. And here Jim asks, what? New one? With this coalition going on? You want a word with yourself, Barb. And the coalition, well, that was the Cameron-Clegg coalition that was formed by David Cameron and Nick Clegg when Cameron was invited by Queen Elizabeth II to form a government, following the resignation of Prime Minister Gordon Brown on the 11th of May 2010 after the general election on the 6th of May. It was the UK's first coalition government since the Churchill caretaker ministry in 1945. The coalition was led by Cameron as Prime Minister with Clegg as Deputy Prime Minister and composed of members of both Cameron's centre-right Conservative Party and Clegg's centrist Liberal Democrats. So yes, we get the coalition mention, and Jim hasn't got any specific reasons why he's blaming the coalition. They've cocked up the country and expect us to pay for it, he says. And it's interesting to think maybe what they would tackle in the future. Like I say, they mentioned Barack Obama, they mentioned the coalition. I'm sure if there were episodes in the following decade, there would be Boris mentions and, COVID, obviously. I've said before that I think a COVID Royal Family episode would have been amazing. No doubt Jim would have attacked Jeremy Corbyn as well at some point, and I'm certain the cost of living crisis would have been mentioned. Cost of living crisis, my arse. I mean, you can just see that in the trailer, can't you? Jim says that the current government are changing perspectives for the worse. People have started looking down on you now if you claim benefit. And I mean, I can attest as someone who grew up in the 2000s, and I went to uni in the summer that the coalition came in, that this was always the case, really. It seemed like there were always, the media had always engineered people to look down on people like Jim, I suppose. There's no pride in it anymore, Jim says. signing on. And, signing on and gyro and benefits, these weren't really ever mentioned in the original series, but they do crop up regularly in the specials. The way they're going, he says ruefully, foot still aloft, there'll be no bugger signing on. I mean, yeah, that's kind of the point there, James. The door then rings right on time. Jim urges Barb to get it. I mean, to be fair, he can't get it in his state for once, but as we'll learn soon enough, he really could. Could be Cameron and Clegg now, he says, and then he grumbles angrily after saying it. It's unsure if it's the Koa bloody Lishan themselves that are annoying him, or just the regularness of life. So Jim maintains his scowl from his seat as Dave and Denise enter through the doorway. Denise hugs Barb first and then comes into the lounge with the entrance slightly blocked by the bulging tree. Norma as ornament sticking out proudly from the front and facing us as viewers. Denise is rocking a denim jacket with some big festive earrings. Dave in a more muted jumper and jacket combo. None of that hellfire red shirt that he flexed at the beginning of the Golden Egg Cup. What the hell was that? Denise says she loves the tree, looks up and down, straight away assumes it's from Twiggy. She then gives her dad a lovely smile as she gets closer for a hug, says hiya. But Jim is having none of this. And finally, after all these years, all these specials, it's not Barbara, it's Jim who seems to have had enough.
Hiya, Jim.
Hiya, Dave. Hiya, Denise. Sit down. Have you had your tea? Yeah. What did you have?
I love this so much. How fourth wall breaking. I mean, the Royal Family really is a show, as we've established, where the characters do similar things over and over again. Speech patterns, word repetitions, Congle turn and all that. And Jim is just done with it all. He's saying here probably what a lot of critics are thinking, digging into the back and forth and that. And don't get me wrong, this is the stuff we all love. But it is undeniably the kind of same old thing. I mean, they do talk about their teas a lot. They do yak. Admittedly, Jim's kind of the yakkiest of them all, but it's still quite shocking in the general history of the show for the main character here, or one of the main characters, for him to speak so bluntly about what they do, and again, what he does, and you can just see the three of them there, Barb, Denise and Dave, just looking genuinely shocked and aggrieved. To break the awkwardness then, Dave does another Royal Family trademark. Rather than asking Jim if he's annoyed, he asks his long-suffering wife in that gawpy tone of his. Jim doesn't play along here either though, has no time for this charade. Says he's annoyed with some mustard on it. Congratulations, Sherlock, he says to Dave. And Sherlock Holmes is, of course, a fictional detective created by the British author Arthur Conan Doyle. Referring to himself as a consulting detective in his stories, Holmes is known for his proficiency with observation, deduction, forensic science, and logical reasoning that borders on the fantastic, which he employs when investigating cases for a wide variety of clients, including Scotland Yard. By the 1990s, over 25,000 stage adaptations, films, television productions, and publications were already featuring the detective, and the Guinness World Records lists him as the most portrayed human literary character in film and television history. So what is wrong with Jim? Why is he annoyed? Well, the penny then drops for Denise. She notices her dad's foot, asks if he's done something to his toe. I mean, to be fair, Jim not getting up to greet them from the doorway wasn't a dead giveaway or anything. It wasn't Jim's fault though, Jim says. It's Barbara's. And when the camera pans to him, we can see rolls of Christmas wrapping and a few presents, situated where last we saw Denise's golden anniversary buffet. It's intriguing that it was Barbara who did this, as it were. Obviously it was an accident, but maybe there's some subconscious wishing here, perhaps. We learn that she dropped a frozen turkey on it in the supermarket, apparently. And Barbara's heard this many times before, you can see. She shakes her head at Dave and Denise, says she told Jim that they should have double-bagged it. But of course, that's the rip-off of rip-offs in Jim's eyes. At 5p a carrier bag, Jim says he isn't Lord Sugar. Christ, can you imagine the furore that broke out in the supermarket when it all went down? The noises Jim would make, the stares. I mean, I'm shocked that Jim even went out to help her in the first place, to be honest with you. But we then learned that it isn't his foot which is causing Jim to be so angry. I mean, he no doubt welcomes upgrading his sloth level. So no, it's not his toes, but there is something else afoot. Denise, being Denise, asks a man what's going on rather than speaks to Jim, which causes him again to get annoyed.
What's wrong with him now?
You can't ask me, I am in the room. You haven't got to talk to me through your mother.
Well, what's wrong, Dad?
Don't tell them, Barbara.
Another meta line there that's kind of deconstructing the show. This episode starts really well with some iconoclastic teeth. Denise then does ask her dad, and Jim then tells Barb not to say. But Barb relays some bad news. The sold sign went up this morning. Next door. That means it's sold, Dave says, wide-eyed and gormless. Yes, Dave, it does. Sharp as a cue ball, this one. And next door can only mean one place next door, as we don't know any other neighbours. Well, we will eventually meet Cadge and Carol when she comes in, but at this point, of course, it's Joe, it's Cheryl, it's Mary. And Denise is upset about this. Barb never thought they'd go through with it. Jim says this is going to hit him really hard, and they all agree. But the Royle family being the Royle family, of course, it's not hitting Jim on an emotional level, as you may think. Like, you're thinking, oh man, is Jim going to really miss Mary and Joe and Cheryl, who he consistently took the piss out of for decades? Jim probably... I would wager that Cheryl's first ever insult was given by Jim when she was probably very young. Maybe when she was even first born, No, the reason this is going to upset Jim is not because he's going to miss these people. It's because, like Homer with Flanders, Jim has taken advantage of his neighbour's sharing spirit and is now lamenting the fact that Joe is going to want his lawnmower back, his drill, and his electric screwdriver. Jim counting on his fingers as he tots up the list. And the lawnmower? Well, that was invented in 1830 by Edwin Beard Budding of Stroud, Gloucestershire. Budding's mower was designed primarily to cut grass on sports grounds and extensive gardens, as a superior alternative to the scythe, and was granted a British patent on August 31st, 1830. And a drill is a tool used for making round holes or driving fasteners. It is fitted with a bit, either a drill or driver chuck. And the earliest documented screwdrivers were used in the late Middle Ages. They were probably invented in the late 15th century, either in Germany or France. The tool's original name in German and French was Schraubenzieher, meaning screw tightener, and Tournevis, meaning turn screw. The first documentation of the tool is in the medieval House Book of Wolfegg Castle, a manuscript written sometime between 1475 and 1490. And it's another classic misdirect here, as, we first think Jim is sad that the neighbours are leaving, but it's only because they'll want the tools back. And these are tools that Jim no doubt doesn't even use. It's Barb putting up shelves, it's Barb mowing the lawn. And Jim seems to be, worried about the lawn. Does Jim really care about the lawn? Also, don't, Joe and Mary and Cheryl maybe hear Barbara using the mower? Or haven't they just seen her in the garden and realise she's got it? There's so many unanswered questions here. I'm really upset, Barb says. So am I, Denise says. Then Dave. Then Barbara. There's that trope. Dave is probably genuinely just upset, I guess, at his confusion at the world, but you can definitely get with Barb and Denise. I mean, Denise especially. Look, Cheryl is her best mate, her constant companion who always made her look better, and now she's going off to Lord knows where. Denise hopes they don't move too far, and then there's a chorus of "so do I's," which emerges again, Jim seeming to nod and agree with this wish. Denise then realises something very important. Who's going to look after the kids at the weekend when Cheryl goes? I mean, they don't want to leave them with strangers. And where are the kids? Barbara asks. And then we hear about an all-new off-screen character.
Where are the kids, Denise?
Where are they, Dave?
Older with that old woman 4 doors down.
Oh, yeah. What is her name?
Don't know. She's nice, though, once you get over the smell.
Yeah, they don't know her name, despite her taking sole responsibility for their pride and joy. And Craig Cash really lays on the late-era Dave delivery thick here. His eyes slightly askance, his neck twisting and twizzling forward. So yeah, they don't know her name, she lives 4 doors down, and once you get over the smell, it isn't an issue. Denise then relays what would normally be a nice anecdote by a parent about all the cute things my little kids do. But in reality, she talks about the children having to arm themselves with defences before they head into this house of horrors, having to stick tissues up their nose before they go in. It's shocking, really, but it's dead sweet in Denise's eyes, and Dave agrees. And what is that woman's scent precisely? Well, apparently she smells of, in Denise's eyes, when you've just opened a tin of salmon. Bob says, yeah, she seems intrigued by that. Well, she smells like that, she says, and Denise kind of scrunches her nose for effect. I mean, no one wants to hear this about their grandchildren. It's sad to think that they go to a childminders that has loads of stuff, but they're just unhappy. But here they're going to somewhere actually hellish. Dave doesn't disagree with any of these parenting choices, but he does disagree with Denise's smelling assessment, though, saying it's more cheesy than fishy, and I love that distinction. Jim then suddenly interrupts again, bringing down the gavel on more of this inane Royle family chatter that we all adore. He tells them to shut up, but only because it's making him feel hungry. Somehow. I mean, I imagine it doesn't take much to get that appetite going. Then there's a beat, a moment of silence, and then Denise relays more of her parenting triumphs.
And they can put the pyjamas on in Dave's van before they come home.
Oh, well, you don't want them bringing the smell into your house.
No. Kids don't like it, do they, Dave?
No.
She makes the kids put their pyjamas on in Dave's van before they come back. And Barb gets it. You don't want to bring the smell into the house, do you? So we get this image that this is a bit of a awful setup, really, for the young kids. Bit depressing, really. And then Denise confirms it. The kids don't like her, do they, Dave, she says. He just says no and looks back at the telly. Denise thinks it's lovely for them to go at Christmas. Lovely! And she thinks that because the woman that's taking care of them has a little beard, a white one, which Barb says, oh, how Christmassy. Barb, again, can just always see the good in any moment, even when it's her grandchildren going to this depressing hovel. I mean, Christ, this bearded woman of an unholy fish cheese stench that you have to stick tissues in your nose to be near. Walking in a winter wonderland indeed. Barb then asks what's happening tomorrow, which puts us at Christmas Eve for this scene. Well, Denise can't in all good conscience send them to this lady on Christmas. They need to be with their family after all. Jim agrees with a nod. And then Denise reveals that, of course, they're going to Dave's mum and dad's. Dave Sr. and Jocelyn.
Well, I can't send them to her at Christmas. They need to be with family. So they're going to Dave's mum and dad's.
They don't like it there either, Barbara.
No.
They don't like it there either, Barbara, Dave says. Denise laughs a little, chuckles. I mean, it is sad for these kids. Why couldn't they come over to the Royals for Christmas tomorrow? I mean, no doubt they'd have more fun here. Especially with Uncle Anthony, who has probably got them some great presents. Plus, who wouldn't want Barbara as their nan? Especially at Crimbo. But yeah, I imagine Dave Sr. and Jocelyn just have rings run round them by these kids. They'll be jumping on the recliners and all that. Barbara shoots Jim a look here to say, Christ, even you weren't this bad. But you can't really speak on another's parenting, can you? Well, Jim did a bit when Baby David was little, saying that Baby David didn't even recognise his own mother and that. But now with the kids more grown and the rot set in, what can you do? So the connection between Dave and Denise and their two young'uns is frayed, and then the connection between the fairy lights gives out with a sizzle. Everyone in the room says, oh, for a few times as they kind of go on and off, and then they give an ah as they all give out. Barb then can't hold it in any longer and asks the pair straight up the £1 million question.
Have you had your teas?
Yeah.
Oh, what did you have?
Toad in the hole.
Oh, toad in the hole.
But we didn't have any sausages left, so we just had the hole.
The hole. I didn't like it, really.
Didn't you, Dave?
No, it didn't taste of anything.
No.
Well, it was a hole, Dave.
And toad in the hole is a traditional British dish consisting of sausages and Yorkshire pudding batter, usually served with onion gravy and vegetables. In 2017, a marketing survey found that 23% of British people had never tried toad in the hole, and despite popular belief, there is no record of the dish ever being made with toad. But it may refer to the way toads wait for their prey in their burrows, with their heads poking out just as sausages peep through the batter. It may also derive from the living entombed animal phenomenon of live frogs or toads supposedly being found encased in stone, which was a popular hoax/false belief of the late 18th century. They never have an actual meal, do they, these pair? I bet Denise still hasn't cooked Dave something proper, as Jim stated way back when during season 2. And this is a great joke, but also kind of a philosophical puzzle kind of plopped on top. So they didn't have any sausages for the toad in the hole. So they had the hole. They had the Yorkshire pudding. Dave said it didn't taste of anything, and Barbara states, well, it is a hole. So in essence, it's the absence of something rather than something. It's a hole, despite being something whole with a W in front. And Barb's logic can often go on these weird, quite inspired, slightly baffling places. And Jim here senses that and just shakes his head in disbelief. Denise then turns to her parents and asks, where are Anthony and Saskia? They're off dropping presents tonight, apparently, but in actuality, according to Barb, they just needed a bit of time away from things, pointing at Jim somewhat clandestinely as she does. And behind Barb and Denise at this point with the camera, we can see some gin and other spirit sticking up on the bureau in anticipation of oncoming Christmas cheer. We've heard before in the Golden Egg Cup that Jim and Saskia don't exactly mesh, her perfectly normal disposition, rattled somewhat, understandably so, by Jim's tendency to have a bollock out in public. We learn then that they're here as their new house is going to be ready in the middle of January. I mean, this could have been the basis for a whole hypothetical season 4, It's kind of a nice setup of them being here. But it's good that we just get it in brief. And it's so sweet to see Barb here, clasping her hands together happily as she tells all this, saying it's been lovely having my little boy at home again. Jim can't let her have this, though. Jim, who is really another child that she takes care of, saying that Ant ain't a little boy. He's 6'2" and 30 years old, you daft old bat. Christ, Jim. I mean, they never really grow up in the eyes of parents who love them. Why can't you understand that? Why can't you take delight in your wife saying how much she loves the son that you produced together, you raised together? Well, she raised him more than you. He must really love that lawnmower that he never uses. Barbara quite rightly scolds her husband here with and a Merry Christmas to you and all, Jim. and all he can do is proffer a bar humbug sound of his own in response. Denise then asks her mum if they'd like to take advantage of Ant and Saskia being out and go upstairs and have a little look at what Saskia's got hung up in her wardrobe. We've seen this inclination before from Denise and Barb in the final episode of the original series, the Christmas special with Roger and Valerie, where we saw them trying on Valerie's coat, how the other half sleeve and all that. I mean, Denise loves clothes, remember? We saw her in the first episode in the pilot looking through that catalogue and putting Cheryl's fingers on men's knobs. What's she like? It's a little invasive, what Barb and Denise are doing, but ultimately harmless, I guess. Though we will hear in a moment about most of the family taking advantage of Saskia's privacy in quite a malicious way. Barb says it's a good idea, though, to do that, what Denise has suggested. It's quite flattering, really. The two of them then agree and are soon up and out of the room. Barb giggles, and we can hear her say as they walk up the stairs, "Oh, she's got some lovely jeans." Jim watches them leave and then leans over to Dave. Says it's doing his head in having them over. Dave, of course, doesn't immediately realise who he means, of course. Jim calls him a rattlehead. And Jim says that Barb is constantly on at him now. He can't fart in front of Saskia, he can't scratch his nuts, he can't lounge in his wife fronts. It's no life, this. It's a bloody existence, he moans. All the joys in his life have gone, he says, which, yeah, I mean, Jim is a man of simple pleasures, right? Chippies, bacon sandwiches, bollock scratching. It's ruining all of his traditions. When he goes for his morning dump, he has to hang around now to see if there's any floaters. Christ. Poor pregnant Saskia, they can't be good for the baby. The stress, the smell. He had a 20-minute battle with one this morning, he says. It was like trying to sink the Ark Royal, which Dave laughs at. And the Ark Royal, this was a reference that went over my head. So the HMS Ark Royal was an aircraft carrier of the Royal Navy that was operated during the Second World War. The Ark Royal operated in some of the most active naval theatres of the conflict and was involved in the first aerial U-boat kills of the war. It also survived several near misses and gained a reputation as a lucky ship. It was, however, torpedoed on the 13th of November 1941 by the German submarine U-81. Her sinking was the subject of several inquiries, with investigators keen to know how the carrier was lost, in spite of efforts to save the ship and tow her to the naval base at Gibraltar. They found that several design flaws contributed to the loss, which were rectified in new British carriers. So Jim's whole world is coming down then, and what about if he goes for a wee and he misses? Well, he now has to clean it up in case Saskia, you know, the woman holding his grandchild, he has to clean it up his bloody self in case she sees it. What an ask! Can't even depend on Barb to clean it for him now after he leaves it. Jim pulling down his shirt in anger at the end of this point to underscore his irritation. And what about when Saskia goes for a bath too? Well, apparently there's candles and jock sticks, which is a nice malaprop from Jim there because, yeah, you know, I imagine he ain't familiar with the spiritual sense. It's like bloody Glastonbury up there, he says. Well, I mean, you know, who wouldn't want a bit of calming ambience, James? An incense, well, is an aromatic biotic material that releases fragrant smoke when burnt. The term is used for either the material or the aroma. Incense sticks may be termed joss sticks, especially in parts of East Asia, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. The word incense comes from Latin incendere, meaning to burn. And Glastonbury, of course, is a 5-day festival of contemporary performing arts held near Pilton, Somerset, England in most summers. Glastonbury takes place on 1,500 acres of farmland and is attended by around 200,000 people. They really keep going with this, and it's tremendous, you know. Jim is annoyed that he can't do all of his disgusting bodily functions for a while. He's pissed off that he can't just piss on the floor and expect Barbara to wipe it all up. And then on top of that, he can't even have a good old perf.
It's like bloody Glastonbury up there. And our Anthony's blocked the keyhole up with toilet roll. What sort of a man does he think I am? Hey! Took me nearly 20 minutes to unpick it. By the time I'd finished, she'd had a shower and she'd gone.
I mean, wow. That's kind of stomach-turning, really. You know, not only is Jim actively trying to sneak a peek of his naked, pregnant daughter-in-law in the bath, like, what the hell? Not only is this apparently something Jim does, it's kind of hard to go through this bit. Not only this, but Anthony, his son, then seems to know all too well that this was going to happen. And rather than confronting his father face on, as any husband really should do when someone is snooping on their wife, Ant just sets up a bit of defence to stop it from even happening. I mean, why wouldn't Saskia feel uncomfortable here? She can't even get peace in the bathroom because Hopalong Cassidy is trying to grab a cheeky peep. Dave doesn't really know what to say to this and just lets it sit. I mean, it is a bit too much to dwell on. I'm not going to lie. This might actually be the worst Jim has ever shown. I mean, he definitely gets worse in the specials. You know, a lot of people think about that scene in Queen of Sheba who takes the 50 of Anthony, and that is very ugly. But in this one, we don't know at this point in the episode, but I'm sure you've probably watched the episode, spoilers, but Jim is actually lying about his foot. So that's quite a big deal. We've just had the whole peeping saga, which is just, yeah. And then there's lots of stuff, the way he speaks about Mary upcoming as well. So, fair enough. It's a bit like The Sopranos, really, in season 3, where David Chase realised that people were liking these characters too much and he had to show them how awful they were. And, there's Employee of the Month, if you're familiar with that episode, and also Ralphie and Tracy, etc. Is that what the writers are doing here slightly? Like, they're making you, no, this guy, he's lovable, but, like, if you heard of anyone else doing this stuff, you would never want to be within a million yards of them, On TV is Jeremy Clarkson on Top Gear. It's a Christmas special, and we can see tons of gifts in front of the set in that classic old studio. Jim is always ask, though. He's then requesting that tomorrow at Christmas to Dave, if he does a fart, will Dave own up for him? Dave asks, what if you don't do one? Which, doesn't really make sense, as I can't imagine there's been an episode where he hasn't, and Jim adding that a belly full of Barbara sprouts is an accident waiting to happen. Jim says that it'll give Dave a sign. When he's cleaning his glasses, that means he's set one free. Jim then takes his glasses off at this point to give a preview of the signal. And it's always weird seeing Ricky without his iconic glasses, as we do at that moment. Dave says he will, and then Denise and Barb come downstairs happily. She's got lovely things, Denise says, smelling her wrist and holding it up for Dave to sniff. She says the scent is lovely, apparently, and she's going to try and sneak up tomorrow and put some on for Christmas. Surely Saskia will notice, and I can't imagine she'd care if you just asked her, but as Jim just showed with Dave, respect of guest privacy in the Royle household isn't really a thing. Barb says it's a good idea by Denise, and she'll try and do that as well. Jim nods. There's so much in this opening scene, I must say, of just cutting to Jim nodding at things or Jim reacting to things, any time Ricky's face is on camera, it's always engaging. We then hear about another transgression of Saskia's personal space. She keeps a diary. Something Denise says is funny at her age. I still keep a diary, to be honest with you. And in some alternate reality, it would have been funny to see like a tie-in product of Saskia's diary. And I only bring that up because in the Mrs. Merton show, they have 2 tie-in books that were written by the writers. One of them's called Mrs. Merton's Book of Friendship. I forget what the other one's called. I do have them downstairs. But yeah, it would be intriguing just to see it written in Saskia's voice. You can only imagine what the outpourings are in there. Well, she doesn't think much of Jim in it, we learn. Well, yeah, that makes sense from what we've heard. Jim knows, though. He's read it. Slovenly my arse, he says, which works beautifully. Why wasn't she up front, Jim says. Well, she was confiding in private, but Jim says she's sneaky, unlike the rest of the roles, of course. Jim is cautious too, though. Quick to ask if they put the padlock back on, giving a thumbs up when it's confirmed that she won't learn of their intrusion. Why she keeps that key in a separate drawer, I'll never know, Bob says. Jim and Denise agree, and then the lights begin to sizzle again on the tree, turning on and off until they shut down entirely. Dave offers to have a look at the tree lights for Barb. Dave is apparently brilliant with electricity, Denise says. What does she even mean there? Barb coos. Dave seems to kind of know, for once, what he's talking about here. He says it's normally a fuse bulb, finds it, and with a reassuring, here you are, the lights go back on. The family are overjoyed, and Dave lifts his arms aloft triumphantly. He's about to sit down, and then the lights go straight off again, and the whole lounge is plunged into pitch darkness. Dave clatters around in the void, and then he seems to step directly on Jim's toe, who screeches, as It's Beginning to Look a Lot Like Christmas plays, and the first scene fades out. And It's Beginning to Look a Lot Like Christmas is a Christmas song written in 1951 by Meredith Willson. The song was originally titled It's Beginning to Look Like Christmas, and of course there's many versions, most notably Perry Como and also Bing Crosby recorded it in 1951. Again, it doesn't feel like, I guess you can break a toe by treading on it, but I can't imagine Dave was putting that much force down, when they were in that void there. So, Jim just rolls with it and everyone just kind of believes Jim because despite his many deficiencies, he's very convincing at trying to make you believe his injuries. So we then fade back into the living room and we're on Christmas morning, which is a time we haven't actually spent with the Royals yet. What with both of the 2 classic Christmas specials being in the evening after dinner and the new sofa being at lunchtime elsewhere. So Barb is standing up and unwrapping a big present. It's a Dyson. Jim is stunned. And from behind Barb, we can see the room all festooned with various festive fineries. And Dyson Limited, which trades as Dyson, is a Singaporean multinational technology company. Founded in 1991 by James Dyson in Malmesbury, England, the company designs and manufactures household appliances such as vacuum cleaners, air purifiers, hair dryers, bladeless fans, hand dryers and lights. We then pan from Barb and Jim to the rest of the family in the lounge watching. There's Dave and Denise, of course, with Cheryl behind Denise sitting on the floor. There's Ant. And then there's a new girl. It's Saskia. She's sitting on the sofa, she's rocking a huge baby bump, you know. She's fitting to pop as soon as possible, really, and heavily pregnant on Christmas Day, just as Denise was all those years ago. And yeah, great to see Saskia here, and she's played by, like, you know, a proper top-tier actress, British actress here, Joanne Froggatt, who has had a great career, continues to have a great career, probably best known as portraying Anna Bates in Downton Abbey from 2010 to 2015, so she just started in that role when she was in this episode. Dave is in a reindeer jumper, and Ant is rocking a casual checkered shirt. It's what she's always wanted, Barb says. Ant is glad she likes it. Barb hugs Ant and then kisses Saskia, saying thank you. And it's all right, Saskia says with real warmth. Barb is literally in seventh heaven right now. It's perhaps a bit sad that a present designed exclusively for housework is doing this, but she's happy nonetheless, and that's what we like to see, at least, you know, I do. I like to see her being treated. Denise then rues her present decision, saying she wished she got them a Dyson now instead of a fridge magnet that they went with. Well, in a way they both suck, so there's a parity there, I guess. Denise, who is rocking a playful snowflake tiara and big bearded Santa earrings that could actually be of that smelly old woman who takes care of the poor kids. Barb says she likes them exactly the same, the magnet and the Dyson, which is charming if untrue. And then Jim is gifted something massive. Something totally undeserved, and something that I'm sure Saskia probably laments in her diary, but she then passes Jim a big package. "This one's for you, Jim," she says. "For me?" He titters excitedly. He starts to dig in, saying, "Lucky me," and we can see that it's Sky HD, which he wanted back in the new sofa with the holiday money. Well, he only had to wait a year for it to come around, and then he can have it. He calls Saskia a queen, a bloody diamond, and as he can't get up, he ushers her to go to him, thanks her, and then, slaps her on the arse and tells her to go and sit down. I guess it's meant affectionately, but it's still a bit rude regardless, especially when you've just been gifted something you've always wanted, and with his peeping priors. Ant and Cheryl seem to shoot a bit of an awkward look here when this happens, but, you know, it passes in a moment. And we don't quite see the full box. Like, it's not like Jim holds it up to the camera and we can really appreciate what it is. There's, like, some copy on the back that I want to read, because it's kind of designed in a very mid-2000s kind of way. You know, very minimal and abstract. But yeah, Jim's got the Sky HD box, and he says that he's going to put this amazing gift pride of place beside the fun-sized bar of Toblerone that Dave, Denise, and the two kids got him. Denise looks at Dave, who just awkwardly sips. And I'm certain here it's another great money box robbers situation. Jim, of course, can't hold back the "you tight ass" muttered under his breath as he says it too. Barb then asks everyone if they're ready. They all excitedly say yeah, and she then pops on the Dyson to a chorus of woos as she wheels it round with real panache and showcasing decades of solo practice. It seems nimble. One of them proper fancy ones with a yellow ball at the bottom. The camera pans down to the cylinder itself, and it seems to tellingly be, in the space of a few seconds, near capacity, with a huge clump of dirt pulled off the floor and into the clear exterior. "It's lovely, Barbara," says Shezza, looking at all the muck inside, collected and clotted. Barb says thanks and asks if Joe's on his way. He's due shortly, it seems. He's bringing Mary with him as well, who, at this point of the episode, if you're just watching it, you've never seen it, you assume that Mary's still alive. Though, admittedly, she was kind of sounding on the outs in the last outing. "Well, let's get to the table then," Barb says. And everyone gets up ready for the greatest meal of the year, Christmas lunch. It's Saskia who really needs help there with a big belly. But there's another bulging member of the family who Barb instructs Dave and Anthony to help with. Their old Dar Jim. Now with two toes wrapped up in swaddling after the tree incident the night before. And there's terrific acting from Ricky here, who really does seem in agony. Denise stifles a laugh along with Saskia, whilst Cheryl just looks concerned. Dave and Ant wrench Jim up, which cannot be an easy task, and he's then pulled across to the table to a few prospective chairs before being moved on and on. Jim doesn't want to be in the first place as he won't be able to see the telly. Then he's moved again because he can't block Barb getting the food out, and then moved on again because Denise just doesn't want to sit next to him. Jim then splutters, still being held by the two lads with much struggle. Why don't they just drop him in the bloody garden and be done with it? And of course we learn later on that this is entirely an act on Jim's part, and his dedication to the bit is admirable. Jim is then pulled up to where he sat in the classic Sunday afternoon episode in Series 2, at the top of the table. Loads of Santa ornaments surrounding him. He urges the boys to watch his bollocks and gets plonked down with much upheaval and effort. And behind Jim is the scored wallpaper of yore and also a huge batch of spirits behind him in various levels of liquidity. Ant is still Ant in Jim's eyes though, and he's ordered instantly to grab the puff. Called a clumsy sard as Jim's foot is dragged up with both feet raised right in whiffing distance beside the soon-to-be set with food table. Jim mews and writhes. Denise finds it funny, but poor Saskia has seemingly got the short straw, sitting beside Jim's dirty feet and shooting them an equally dirty look. There's no time for that though, as It's Joe and Mary, we hear from Barb off screen. Merry Christmas, Barb says, and in comes Joe with a big urn under his arm. Oh, Mary's dead then. Like, what a sad moment to see Joe come in with the ashes under his arm. The reality of the situation just dropped on us. I mean, everyone else knew, of course, apart from us. And I definitely felt the wind taken out of me when I was watching this for the notes. You know, at least with Nana, you could see it coming somewhat, but this happened all off screen. We know she's been unwell, what we've not been able to watch You've Been Framed on Saturday nights as it causes us to go off like Kew Gardens and that, but yeah, beloved Mary's passed on. First Nana and now Mary. So Joe has the urn under his arm, wishes everyone Merry Christmas, and says he brought Mary as he didn't want her to be alone, which is sad, you know. It's as much for her as him, obviously.
Merry Christmas, everybody.
Merry Christmas, Joe.
I brought Mary with me because I didn't like to leave her on her own.
No, nobody should be on their own at Christmas.
Jim scrunches his nose at this, and this is the first of so many times throughout the episode where he doesn't seem to respect Joe and the fact that he's grieving. Like, anything Joe says, he will just laugh about. And again, it's like the perving and it's like the lying. It's Jim up 10 here. So Joe is instructed by Jim to sit down beside him. But what about Mary, he asks. Barb then grabs her and puts her on the TV next to Nana. They always got on well together, she says. And they really did, actually. You could sense a proper friendship there. Mary, slightly younger than Norma, clearly respected her as an elder, as a matriarch, and liked to chat to her. You know, we saw them in the third episode reflecting on the perils of marriage. Mary saying that the prospective newlyweds knew nothing of pain. And also when they were drunk at the christening, talking about Michael Barrymore being a homosexual sometimes, and, you know, Nana wondering what they actually do. So down Mary is plonked beside Norma, which is sweet. Jim says it's a pity they scattered his mum's ashes, as they could have set a table for all three of them. Jim's mum, too. I mean, we've heard tiny bits about her. We hear at the end of the second episode that his dad's been dead a long time, and I think he treated his mum badly. But yeah, I mean, Jim's parents don't really figure into the show, do they? It's just a nice gesture to the dearly departed Mary, but it seems to be causing Jim a lot of irritation. But, you know, I guess it's Jim. Jim's just Jim, Christmas or not. Ant says Merry Christmas to Joe as he sits down, introduces Saskia, and as he does, we can appreciate the table a bit better, the dinner table. There's butter, brown and red sauce in well-used bottles, some wine, a glass cup too, which must have been gifted prior to Jim, that says in big bold letters, Dad's pint. So Joe hasn't met Saskia yet, it seems, and he will often mispronounce her name throughout the episode. And the first one we get here is Shashkia. Says it's lovely to meet her. I wish you could have met my wife Mary, but she's dead at the moment. What a line! What a concept! Dead at the moment. Poor Joe, he's still clearly in the blast radius of grief, groping and coping. Denise smiles at the first part and then frowns at the end. It's a shame that Cheryl has to hear this too, has to deal with it in her own way. And Joe points her out on top of the TV, his Mary, just in case Saskia missed all that. Saskia's own grandmother passed recently, we hear, and she says that she's still in the urn. They haven't got round to scattering the ashes yet. Jim says she should have brought her round, join the lineup of the living dead on the television. Saskia just looks down at this a bit awkwardly. I mean, this is disrespectful, no doubt. He doesn't know Saskia's relationship to her grandmother. Bloody hell. And Jim then goes even further, saying, what time is Vincent Price going to show up? And Vincent Lennon Price Jr. was an American actor known for his work in the horror film genre, mostly portraying villains. He appeared on stage, TV and radio, and in more than 100 films, starring in such films as The Fly, The Last Man on Earth, various things with Roger Corman for Edgar Allan Poe adaptions, and he also appeared in the OG Batman, the Adam West TV show Batman, as Egghead. So they're all sat down now, they're all about to get stuck in. You know, most people laugh at the Vincent Price stuff. Cheryl doesn't seem to get it. Saskia then asks Barb if she wants any help in the kitchen. All pregnant and everything. Baby much bigger than the size of a tangerine at this point. Dave and Denise share a look of shock at this. Ant nods knowingly as if, yeah, she's proper this one. Jim then rouses Dave into action to pour him some wine, on account of his toes. Dave goes first to pour some into Saskia's cup, and she obviously says no thanks. To be honest though, it has been established that Denise did drink heavily throughout at least her first pregnancy, so how is he going to know? Cheryl asks the due date, and it's coming in the middle of January, we hear. She asks about the craving she's having, and Jessica Hines, I've got to get used to saying it like Courtney Cox Arquette. Jessica Hines, like, she gives, obviously she's amazing as Cheryl in general, but there's a lot of Cheryl in this episode, a lot of Joe, a lot of Cheryl. And, you know, I love the way she plays Cheryl here in these scenes. Cheryl seems breathier like, more patient, slower, more aged. But to be fair to Shezza, she always was a little half-soaked. So on the cravings front, Saskia says she's been having strong cravings for Maltesers. Denise says she had cravings of her too. Then asking Dave to remind her of what they were, as, he was no doubt the dog's body that got them. But she's not saying my two, in terms of her two kids. She's rather referring to vodka and Red Bull were her two cravings. So, okay, damn, she was drinking her baby too as well. Cheryl just kind of nods at this as if, no, she really was imbibing a lot of alcohol whilst the babes were in the womb. And vodka Red Bull, well, that was invented by the notable futurologist Benjamin Reed in 1999. It is believed that it was an accidental creation, and the original recipe also contained lemonade. Lemonade was eventually dropped from the recipe, as Reed felt that for more solid branding and popularity, asking for a vodka Red Bull and lemonade was too long-winded. Denise then extends some pleasantries to Saskia, but of course, it isn't what it seems. Says if they ever need a babysitter, just ask them. Playing with her hair as she says it, as, Denise does when she's chatting. Yeah, you just need to ask Denise about this because, well, there's an old woman near her, 4 doors down, that has theirs any time. Jim is cut to scowling at this bit, quite rightly, but I'm sure he'd rather they go there than be down at the Royal Palace. Barb is then seen at the doorway, bringing the food in with a proper gorgeous-looking bird, but Dave has to go straight away, like announcing in an awkward manner that he's going on the toilet. Not just nipping off for a wee, but a full confirmation of exactly what's going down, It's such a British thing to do that, isn't it? Just describe, I'm going to the loo. It's just like, just go. Jim folds his arms and looks down in embarrassment at this. Barb says thanks, Dave, and comes through, putting the big turkey down. Making conversation then, Cheryl says, oh, wasn't it awful? Someone stole the Christmas tree from in front of the old people's home. Jim glances back and forth between the towering tree in the front room and Barb, making it clear that, damn, this isn't just a dodgy tree that Twig nicked off some lot. The tree itself was actually in front of an elderly folks' home. I mean, Twig's really putting himself on the line here for the Royals. It's a big risk, but we know as well that he likes to be inside for the winter, so maybe he was doing it to get caught.
Oh, wasn't it awful? Did you see in the metro somebody stole the Christmas tree from in front of the old people's home?
Oh, and never mind about that, Cheryl, love. You're bringing the atmosphere down. Oh, it's the turkey. Come on, let's have 3 cheers for the turkey.
Jim snuffs out that Cheryl talk quickly, though, saying it's bringing the atmosphere down, and gives 3 cheers for the turkey. Everyone applauding. It then gets passed to Jim as head of the household to cut it, and, of course, he does it in his perfectly cack-handed way. An unwashed, grubby hand, holding it down as he saws uncouthly at the bird. Joe then says, apropos of nothing, pigs in blankets. Everyone seems to ignore it, but Ant, being the sweet guy he is, asks further. And also, I like the angle from behind Joe. We can see a cute porcelain dog on the shelf behind him. Well, Mary loved them, apparently, pigs in blankets. I mean, who doesn't? And Jim just looks at Joe in disbelief here for no real reason. It's a bereaved husband, reminiscing on the things that his dearly departed loved. Have a bloody heart, Jimbo. If, God forbid, Barbara would pass, and he'd be talking about her favourite things, and Joe made a face, how would he feel? So, yeah, Jim, please, have a heart. Have a bloody sense of presentation too. I mean, Toby Carvery, this ain't. As Jim just flicks bits of meat at everyone wildly, rather than dishing it up tenderly. Jim gives Joe a big leg and plumps it on his plate, throws a little bit of chicken to Saskia and encourages her to help herself to the margarine. And margarine, well, that's a spread used for flavouring, baking and cooking. It is most often used as a substitute for butter. Although originally made from animal fats, most margarine consumed today is made from vegetable oil. The spread was originally named oleomargarine, from Latin for oleum, olive oil, and Greek margaret, meaning pearl, including lustre. The name was later shortened to margarine. Joe's started now, so he can't stop. Tells Chotchki, I think that's what he says, that Mary had all her teeth until the day she died. Well, except for the top set and another 6 at the bottom. Joe keeps her dentures on the bedside table, we learn next. So every morning that he gets up, there she is smiling. Oh, poor Joe. He didn't know how good he had it back in the day, standing taciturn at the back of the room until someone needed a song. And when Joe's really missing Mary, well, he pops her glasses on top of this contraption. And it's quite the surreal, Lynchian, Hieronymus Bosch image here that he's painting. And it's heartbreaking, too, that when he says that he pops her glasses, he gives Cheryl's shoulder a little tap as he laughs. It's all slightly disturbing, but entirely understandable. You imagine that Joe and Mary have been together their whole lives and probably had Cheryl fairly later in life considering their ages. I mean, Cheryl and Denise are pretty much the same age after all, but Joe and Mary are much older than Jim and Barb. And Jim can't help himself again, of course. He's mid-cutting meat when he says that why doesn't Joe just get a moped to complete the whole bloody picture? Oh, you are a spiteful sod, Jim Royle. It's a good job that Joe only takes half notice really at the best of times.
Tell me, who wouldn't look forward to Christmas Day?
Well, a turkey for one.
Dear old Mary would have laughed at that if she wasn't dead, Anthony.
The mood is lifted, and then it drops again. And she really would have chortled at that, you can be sure. Jim then compliments Barb on how lovely it looks, and it really does. But Joe is quick to begin a toast, which traditionally, of course, you do prior to the meal. Joe says he hopes they don't mind, but he'd like to have a minute's silence for Mary before they all eat, despite them already starting. And a moment of silence is a period of silent contemplation, prayer, reflection, or meditation. Similar to flying a flag at half-mast, a moment of silence is often a gesture of respect, particularly in mourning for those who have died recently, or as part of a tragic historical event, such as Remembrance Day. The first recorded instance of an official moment of silence dedicated to a dead person took place in Portugal on February 13th, 1912. That was when the Portuguese Senate dedicated 10 minutes of silence to José Maria da Silva Paranos Jr., Baron of Rio Branco, Brazil, and Minister of the Exterior of the Brazilian government, who had died 3 days earlier on February 10th. In the same year, large parts of the United States kept a ceremonial silence to honour the dead of the Maine and the Titanic. In recent years, in the UK and Israel, at sports events like football, the minute's silence is often replaced by a minute's applause. There's no need for us to do that though, Joe, Jim says, turking his gnashers. Cheryl says nothing, still noshing herself. Joe asks her to time it for him. Jim can't believe this is being asked. Joe bows his head as Cheryl says from now, and everyone puts their food down. Jim just can't believe how much they're being made to do in the name of respecting dead Mary's memory. He mouths to Barb annoyed, who mouths back, "What can I do?" Jim just folds his arms, pissed off. Joe has his head down reverently. Denise cocks her head immediately to see how much time is left. Cheryl too is clock watching on her pink watch, but obviously still digging into her food with her spare hand. Her own mother, and she doesn't seem to care a jot. And I know the show tonally is in a different place to what it was in the classic era, but a scene of Cheryl reflecting on Mary somewhat would have been nice. I mean, Mary seemed a very sweet parent to Cheryl, very understanding of her particular habits. During the silence, Jim picks up the cutting knife and psycho pumps it in Joe's direction. Barb says behave. The time just passes slow until Dave ruptures it, coming downstairs with perfect timing.
Have you got any air freshener, Barbara?
Dave! Shush!
What's up? What's happening?
Have a minute's silence for Mary.
When's it happening?
It's now, Dave.
Do you have any air freshener, Barbara? He asks. Everyone gets him to shush. Denise particularly annoyed and outraged at this. Stupefied and loud, Dave asks, "What's up? What's happening?" They're having a minute's silence for Mary, Dave's told, and then he naturally asks into the suddenly quiet room, "When's that happening?" "It's now, Dave," Joe says sternly. Then saying that as it's been interrupted, they must do it again, much to the consternation of Jim. Cheryl is still eating, but also still watching her wristwatch. She nods at Dave, who doesn't quite seem to know what to do. And Jim, for the life of him, cannot sit still. Coughs up a whole storm, he grabs his glasses and jostles them theatrically, but this isn't just to make a point, of course. It's the sign, the agreed father-in-law code. Jim has launched one, right during the minute's silence. It's disrespectful not only to Mary, but to Saskia too, who's right there. Dave then interrupts the silence for a second time, making the announcement with, "Excuse me, everyone." And Joe is properly annoyed this time, and who can blame him? Dave stating it is he who did the trump, not Jim. As if the ownership was on anyone's mind at this point. And Jim, of course, uses this opportunity to make himself look better, telling him to show a bit of bloody respect. No one reacts to the smell this time, but Joe wants them to do it again, the silence, a third time. But it's Cheryl, Joe and Mary's daughter, who's the one that's pushing it all along, reasoning that they did 40 seconds then and 30 seconds the first time, so technically they're being overly respectful here. They're 10 seconds over.
We'll have to do it again.
Well, actually, Dad, we did 40 seconds then and 30 seconds the first time, so we're 10 seconds over.
Everyone applauds then, eager to get on with their crimbo dinner, but it's a sad moment, really. Poor Joe leaning over dejected, head down, just wanting to get in a proper tribute to Mary on this saddest of days to be without a loved one. And you can see Cheryl put a loving hand on her dad and shaking his shoulder to reassure him somewhat. Saskia says the meal's lovely. Barb passes her some gravy and a Pyrex, which is the only way it should be served. Cheryl then asked Saskia what she got Ant for Christmas, and this really was the must-have gift in terms of televisual brilliance in 2010. A 3D TV. Naturally, Denise, Dave and Jim all say 3D TV in shock. Dave saying that he'd love it.
Fancy watching this morning in 3D TV? Holly Willoughby's Wallabies coming towards you in 3D. That's the future.
Willoughby's Wallabies in 3D.
2 double Ds in 3D, eh, Dave?
Ooh, one day'd do me.
One day at a time, sweet Jesus.
Funny sequence here with some good wordplay. Jim immediately thinking the benefit of a 3D TV would be seeing breasts up close rather than some grand upgrade of fidelity or whatnot. And that song that Jim's singing is One Day at a Time, a popular country and western style Christian song written by Marijan Wilkin and Chris Christopherson. It has been recorded by over 200 artists and reached #1 in several territories, including Scottish singer Lena Martell, who had a UK singles #1 with her version in 1979. Everyone giggles, they're Christmas merry. Saskia seems to have a small smile, but there's not much time for merriment when Joe's at the table. Wasn't Mary's funeral a good send-off, he asks everyone. They all agree. Jim shakes his head. It was a glorious day, Joe, says Barbara. A lovely service. It's just a shame about the ice cream van during the eulogy. I mean, yeah, that would have distracted the flock, no doubt. Then Cheryl says something which always hit me as very depressing, especially because it being on account of old Mary and the like. I mean, sorry, I know I'm going on a lot about Mary here, but damn, I love Mary and she's gone. So Cheryl says that the vicar said that it was the smallest gathering he'd ever seen, which is tragic, really. It doesn't really ring true either. Like, surely all the royals were there, everyone else was there. You know, maybe most of her family were in Ireland or passed away. We'll hear of another member in a moment. It's just a weird thing for a vicar to say, though, in that context. And perhaps it was the vicar that we saw in The Queen of Sheba.
It was a lovely service, Joe. Just a shame about the ice cream van during the eulogy.
The vicar said it was the smallest gathering he'd ever seen.
And why oh why is Jim laughing at this statement? It's not funny in the slightest, and he's coming across as a right dick here. I was trying to pass this joke as well. Is the joke that the ice cream van emptied out the crowd and that's why it was so small? I think that's what they're going for here. But ultimately, it seems to be Jim laughing at dear old Mary's send-off being poorly attended. Like, I'm certain he probably would have cried in the church, so why is he laughing now? We then get a bit more Mary backstory. Her sister was there, Irish just like Mary, Joe says. Mary kept most of her teeth, we heard before, but this one, she was the one with the one black tooth, off-centre, hanging loose. Man, what an image. This bizarro Mary. Denise asks if she was the one who tried to start a Mexican wave in the church. I mean, she does sound a little off a rocker, but Barb still tries to make it pleasant. She was a bit of funner, wasn't she, she says. Was she? And the wave, also known as the Mexican wave, is a type of metrochronal rhythm achieved in a packed stadium or other large seated venue when successive groups of spectators briefly stand and raise their arms. Most sport historians agree that the wave began internationally during the 1986 FIFA World Cup in Mexico. It was broadcast to a global audience and the wave was popularised worldwide after the tournament. This was the first time that most people living outside of North America had seen the phenomenon. As a result, English speakers outside of North America called the phenomenon a Mexican wave. So yes, Mary's sister, she was giggling all the way through the service we hear, and Jim can't get his giggles under control either, laughing now at the fact that Mary had an unwell sister at a barren funeral. She's not a bit of fun though, Barb, I'm afraid. Joe just bluntly says, mouthful of turkey dinner, she's certified insane. And the matter-of-factness, Peter Martin's delivery there, the moment is magnificent. It really lands for me.
Oh, she was a bit funner, wasn't she? She was giggling all the way through the service.
She's certified insane.
Come to think of it too, Barb did think it was a bit odd, her trying to get everyone to the conga following out the church. I'm surprised it was enough for a conga line. And Jim laughs again here. He just can't stop at this point, that muttly rasp of his. And the conga line is a novelty line dance that was derived from the Cuban carnival dance of the same name and became popular in the US in the 1930s and 50s. In order to perform the dance, dancers form a long processing line, which would usually turn into a circle. It has 3 shuffle steps on the beat, followed by a kick that is slightly ahead of the 4th beat. Beginning in the late 30s, the dance became popular in the United States. However, in the 40s, it became very popular due to Hollywood's Latin musicals. And in an interesting bit of synchronicity, obviously we met Dave Sr. and Jocelyn in The New Sofa, those of course being Helen Fraser and Tom Courtenay, and they appear in the classic British film Billy Liar from 1963, which has a scene at Locarno Dance Hall that features a conga line. What a small bloody world. Joe then gets into the specifics of the burial itself. They put everything dear to her in the coffin, Shashkia, he says. What a lovely idea, Saskia says, and Joe agrees. She asks what they put in there, and he says her wedding dress, her Beverly Callard Keep Fit video, her George Foreman grill, and a photo of Cheryl. But unfortunately, Not our Cheryl, I mean, that would be too thoughtful, as Cheryl is quick to dispel. It's actually of that megastar of the moment, Cheryl Cole. And who's Beverly Callard? Well, she's an English actress known for a role as Liz McDonald in the long-running ITV soap opera Coronation Street, and Flo Henshaw in 2 Pints of Lager and a Packet of Crisps, which had old Ralph Little and Sheridan Smith in. And yeah, I didn't recognise her name, but when I saw a picture, I was like, yeah, she's an iconic matriarch of Coronation Street. And weirdly, she did lots of workout videos. Real Results is one of them. There's also one called Lasting Results from 1998, and they're all on YouTube. And they were giant smashes. I actually found this article about her time on I'm a Celeb. So this is from the Manchester Evening News. Corrie legend Beverly Callard entertained her fellow campers on I'm a Celeb when she waxed lyrical about her fitness video chart success. The 63-year-old soap star told her castmates that her video Rapid Results was such a success that it knocked the film Heat, starring Al Pacino and Robert De Niro, off the charts. Now this was fact-checked, and apparently she wasn't quite right, and it was apparently number 2 on the charts. Heat was 3, Toy Story was 1. But still, that's kind of crazy for her to dominate, especially with those two like Hollywood classics. And Cheryl Cole, of course, is an English singer and TV personality. She rose to fame as a member of Girls Aloud, a pop girl group created through ITV's reality competition show Pop Stars The Rivals in 2002. Named the UK's best-selling girl group of the 21st century in 2012, Girls Aloud amassed a string of 20 consecutive UK top 10 singles, including 4 number ones, 2 UK number 1 albums, and 5 Brit Award nominations, winning Best Single for The Promise in 2009. It's amazing, really, that no explanation is given as to why Cheryl Cole was in there. I mean, we have heard in the past about certain things that Mary likes, like, well, she's very religious for one, but obviously The Bill, Ruth Rendell, like, you know, these sort of things could have been included. Denise turns to Bob when they hear about the Cheryl Cole thing, as if to say, what the hell? But it just sort of hangs, and then Jim moves on. Jim's still getting jokes off. Says he's surprised that little Mary could fit in there. Who packed it, he asks. Funeral directors or Pickfords. And Pickfords is, of course, a moving company based in the UK, part of the Pickfords Move Management Limited. The business is believed to have been founded in the 17th century, making it one of the UK's oldest functioning companies. Pickfords is actually mentioned by Charles Dickens in Our Mutual Friend, Book 4, Chapter 12. Quote, the police station sanctuary was not a permanent abiding place, but a kind of criminal Pickfords. No one at the table seems to be as upset as this podcaster, though, at Jim's behaviour. Pretty much everyone laughing at that line, though we don't get to see Joe's reaction. Joe doesn't get the hint, though, either, and keeps going with the funeral chat. He's brought a poem with him, if they'd like to all hear it again. Everyone says no. It's still fresh in our minds, Jim says, but Barb says if he wants to read it, let him read it. And besides, Saskia ain't heard it yet, and she'd like to hear it, wouldn't she? She says yes, but I mean, what else can you say in that situation? So up gets Joe, poems scribbled on a scrap of paper, pulls something out of his teeth, and gets into the reading.
Mary, 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 Mary. Mary, Mary, Mary.
Who's it about, Joe?
Mary.
Jim.
You are my wife, my friend, and my lover. A part-time dinner lady, and also a mother.
Oh.
So much to discuss here. I mean, first of all, the fact that it kicks off with just her name said 8 times is kind of devastating. There's a desperation and hollowness to that. She's a friend and a lover, a part-time dinner lady, and also a mother. Barb saying to this, but Jim immediately playing the bastard, asking when Joe says Mary so many times in the intro, who's this about, Joe? Joe then compares, in the poem, that very royal thing. His and Mary's chip shop orders. She had peas and chips and gravy, he had pie. But yet again, Jim cannot back off. Asks if it's a poem or a bloody menu. For shame, Jim! Barb is right to call him out here, but most of the table is now laughing at Joe. Saskia included, who is trying to stifle it whilst Dave and Ant are openly guffawing. I mean, they all love each other, I'm sure, but darn. Then there's quite a sweet line. Joe talking of the peacefulness of heaven and how he'll be able to spot her up there immediately with her ginger hair. Something that Saskia cannot stomach and snorts some laughter right away as it's said. She artfully pulls it through, though, and makes it seem like she's upset, as really she should be at this. And Joe then concludes.
Is this a poem, Joe, or a bloody menu?
Jim!
I'll meet you in heaven, it's peaceful up there. I'll spot you immediately with your ginger hair. So bye-bye, Mary, now up in the sky. Farewell, my Mary. You're dead now, bye-bye.
Oh.
Jim just openly laughing there at the somewhat crass ending. You're dead now, bye-bye. But Joe is a man of few words, so the very fact that he's even written something to showcase how he's feeling is so moving when you think about it. It gets better every time you read it, Barb says, and I'm sure they've heard it so many times. Barb then spots Saskia being upset and realises it'll be the first time that she's heard this beautiful elegy. Barb then asks Joe not to read it again as it's too upsetting. Anthony leans forward and checks on Saskia to make sure she's okay. I suppose what Barb's saying there is don't read it again today, as he can be quite likely to do another recital. Joe then says that when the curtain was closed and they played her song at the funeral, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. What was it? Saskia asks. And confusingly, it's like a bat out of hell. And Joe even gives us a little rendition of that Meatloaf classic. And of course, Bat Out of Hell is a song written by Jim Steinman for the 1977 album Bat Out of Hell and performed by Meatloaf. The song was honoured at the Q Awards 2008 with the Classic Song Award, with Paul Rees, Q's editor-in-chief, saying, quote, "There are some songs that transcend such things as time and genre, and Bat Out of Hell is assuredly one of them." In a nice touch, we see Cheryl tearing up and wiping her eyes, Denise checking on her. Clearly it strikes a nerve, and clearly it was Mary's song for some ridiculous reason. And I do really appreciate how, like Cheryl Cole, there's no need to explain anything here. It's just brilliantly absurd. Just allow it to settle. So Joe's singing, and then Jim then tells him all right again to calm down a bit, says, bloody hell, Joe, he has been going on a fair bit, to be fair, especially at Christmas. Dead wife or not. Denise says she loved that song, and asks Barb what song she would like played at her funeral. Jim obviously interrupts with what he'd like to be played at Barb's funeral. Ding dong, the witch is dead, he says. And Barb, in response, pulls a proper contorted face at Jim. And of course, Ding dong, the witch is dead is a song in the 1939 film The Wizard of Oz. It is a centerpiece of several individual songs, an extended set piece performed by the Munchkins, Glinda and Dorothy Gale. The group of songs celebrate the death of the Wicked Witch of the East when Dorothy's house is dropped on her by the cyclone. So Barb then looks at Jim, spud on a fork, pointing at him, saying that she knows what she would play at Jim's funeral. And Barb then shows that she's kind of proper down with the kids here, singing a song that was just out a few years before, Alicia Dixon's The Boy Does Nothing, the Does-He Wash-Up song. Everyone laughs and gets involved singing, even Saskia. It's an incredibly fitting tune, it's a great choice. And it's good to see everyone having a sing-song as ever. And that song is The Boy Does Nothing, a song performed by British singer-songwriter Alicia Dixon, being the lead single from her second studio album, The Alicia Show. The lyrics focus on the men in Dixon's past relationships and their lazy attitudes. The chorus states a frustration with men not completing everyday housekeeping activities. Like, how Jim is this? Does he wash up? Never washed up. Does he clean up? No, he never cleans up. Does he brush up? He's never brushed up. And this is a big song as well. It reached number 5 in the UK charts and hit number 1 in the Czech Republic and Hungary. So everyone's in song, Jim conducts with some cutlery, and everyone cheers at the end. The camera pulling out, and we can see all 8 of them, clearly having a good time. It's a packed table, everyone toasting their glasses, clinking at the end, the original song then coming in playing. And as it does play, we cut straight to the bog upstairs, Jim being held aloft by put upon Dave and Ant. To the left, to the right, he says, ordering them, asking them to be gentle as they bow down and leave the king on his throne. Dave's twizzly hat bouncing as he does. Jim now has a little pink fez type hat on too, berating the boys and asking where they're going and that they've forgotten the trousers, they haven't pulled the trousers down. It's reaching critical mass at this point for Jim. It's peeping, he urges. And we can also appreciate more of the royal family bathroom here, which we rarely spend time in. We can see a picture of an old stately lady above the bog itself. It could be Norma, but I'm pretty sure it's a young Queen Elizabeth. So with great agony, Jim is derobed, with Ant pulling off the old reliable blue jeans and giving Jim some extra toe pain whilst he does it. Give a man a bloody bit of dignity, he says, when the two of them just dawdle. The main man now with his kegs down around his waist. He's quite the sight here, Jim. And the door is then closed, and the octave instrumental guitar break of the Alicia Dixon song takes over. And as that begins to rock, we see Jim laughing to himself as we pan up from his garish toes, and then we see him standing up. Bloody hell, Jim. This is a scam that old Twiggles would be proud of. Making these notes, I completely forgot that this was a thing. Obviously, I've sort of spoiled it earlier, but I didn't realise that Jim was lying throughout the whole episode. And holy hell, this is something quite incredible, really. Something to be hated for in terms of the ruse, but also admired in terms of the dedication and execution. And no one ever learns this. No one ever learns that Jim was lying. Jim never gets his comeuppance, which I think is kind of right, really, for him. Barb's been with him for so long now that even Karma probably doesn't give a shiny shite about Jim. So Jim simply laughs. This is, at the expense of his two beloved family members that he just duped to bring him upstairs. And he stands on his 2 feet tall. So if we think about this logically then, he's been lying about this ever since the incident in the supermarket, which was maybe a few days ago. And as that entire time, has he been having Barb do everything for him? I guess once he's lied, there's no turning back. Like, has she had to help him in the bathroom as well? Surely. It's actually quite the insulting thing to do to the whole family and, to the audience even. The constant mockery of Joe's Mary funeral memories and, also his pervy Saskia ways. I mean, we've totted these up before, but they're all pretty galling when you get down to it. It's a fun choice for the character, though, to be fair. It's obviously more of a cartoonish plot device. It's very much the modern royal family. So Jim then casually grabs the newspaper from the bath side, holds it in his mouth as he sits back down, is still chortling, everyone's stupid but him, spreading the paper out and getting down to business. We then fade back into the next scene, and it's still Mary, 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 of course, with a toast being called by Anthony to Mary. Everyone's deep in their cups now, and Jim hits us with a glorious timestamp, announcing another toast. A toast to the end of 2010, as his country is going to the bloody dogs, isn't it? And he projects this with some ire and certainty.
To Mary!
To Mary!
And to the end of 2010, because the country's going to the bloody dogs, isn't it?
And Joe then chimes in by saying, it's just cuts, cuts, cuts. And here you're thinking, is Joe savvy to the government economic policy? But no, of course, he's talking about Heartbeat, the bill, the last of the summer wine. And we do know Joe as a TV fan, just like the Royals, indeed. He was the one who first mentions the one show in the Child's bleakly loving that is the Golden Egg Cup. And Mary also wanted to get back to watch the bill, etc., and now his wife has gone. And these classic shows with her. And it's quite interesting as well that these are 3 major UK shows here that Joe's mentioning. We all know Heartbeat, The Bill and Last of the Summer Wine in some capacity. And they were all cancelled in 2010. And quickly, let's just go through them. So we have Heartbeat, which is a British police procedural period drama series based upon the Constable series of novels written by Nicholas Ray and produced by Yorkshire Television until it was merged with ITV, then by ITV Studios, from 1992 until 2010. The series is set in the North Riding of Yorkshire during the 60s and takes place in real life and fictional locations. Heartbeat proved popular from the beginning, when early series consistently drew over 10 million viewers, achieving a peak audience of 13.8 million in 2001 and 12.8 in 2003. Its success eventually led to a spin-off series titled The Royle, as well as a special episode and 3 documentaries. In June 2010, ITV announced the cancellation of Heartbeat after its 18th series. And The Bill is another police procedural TV series, first broadcast on ITV, starting in 1984 and lasting until the 31st of August 2010. In March 2010, following a spell of declining audiences and negative public and media reception, executives at ITV announced that the network did not intend to recommission The Bill and that filming would cease in June 2010. And the Bill theme tune, I just want to mention as well, Overkill by Andy Pask and Charlie Morgan. It is, I remember the Bill being on always as a kid. I used to just love hearing the theme tune. It's just like a crazy, proggy wig out. It sounds quite Zappa-esque in places. And finally, what could be less Frank Zappa than Last of the Summer Wine, a British sitcom set in Yorkshire, created and written by Roy Clarke, and originally broadcast by the BBC from 1973 to 2010. Last of the Summer Wine was set and filmed in around Holmfirth, West Yorkshire, England, and centred on a trio of elderly men and their youthful misadventures, and the members of the trio change many times over the years. So Jim was talking about the government, Joe starts talking about old fogey programmes, and Jim just frowns at this but says nothing. Ant grabs a crisp silently in front of Dave, who just says, aye. Dave sounding disappointed that it was about these old-timer programmes rather than economic woes, though, I mean, he probably has a clue on neither, obviously. Cheryl is so full of questions, though, in this episode. I love it. She's a really friendly guest, and through her constant questioning, we get to learn a lot more about Saskia through her curiosity. Do you like being a nurse, she says? Her glance going off into the distance at the end, kind of towards a TV perhaps, or the urns, Her bodysuit that she's wearing also oddly pronounced from this angle. We can also see that Joe beside her now is rocking a snowy tiara. Saskia says it's very rewarding, and it's nice that she's a nurse. It makes sense, really, for caring Anthony to be with someone like that. Cheryl says she herself would have liked to have been a nurse. Barbara says that she thinks she would have made a lovely one, and yeah, you can kind of see it in some sort of bizarro way. Denise agrees, but Cheryl then reveals there's a bit of a snag. in the whole plan. She wants to be a nurse, but the only thing is that she can't stand the sight of blood, so she's a haemophobic, and then she just doesn't like looking after people, which is unfortunately pretty requisite skills there, Cheryl, some key asks. And Cheryl delivers this line brilliantly too, her eyes narrowed, looking at Dave and Saskia and the rest, just delivering this ridiculous reasoning. I wanted to be a nurse, but I don't like blood and I don't like helping people. Well, why did you want to be a nurse then? Jim asks Cheryl. There's a moment, and then she clarifies it's for a simple reason, really. Upside down watches. I mean, you can just get them anywhere, Cheryl. Like, you could probably wear one at the Thornton's job if you got it. It's not clear where she's working at this point. And these upside down watches, I did a little bit of research on these. So these are basically fob watches for nurses that hang off a lapel or pocket. And it appears to hang upside down, but when obviously read from the nurse's perspective, it allows them to quickly and accurately see the time. And why is this such an essential nursing item? Well, I mean, there's many reasons. Obviously, it frees up both hands, allows correct hand washing, you're less likely to transmit infections compared with a wristwatch, enables you to count drip rates, etc., offers a time reference when the wall clock's out of view. Like, they're handy, these things. Bloody hell, Cheryl, all Jim can say, shaking his head as he does. She takes no notice, though. Just asks Saskia another question. What department do you work in? Saying it in an oddly husky way, as kind of Cheryl sounds in these later episodes.
What department do you work in, Saskia?
A&E.
It does seem that as Cheryl's gotten older, she's gotten more detached at points, which is, kind of like the rest of them, kind of like all of us, really, right? It's A&E that she works in, she says. Dave's impressed and nods forward to, I assume Jim, but it could be Joe. You can't really see from the angle that we're at now. It's very impressive wherever you work in a hospital, but A&E is especially cool, isn't it? And, they get all the best stories. Something which Ant attests to, urging Saskia to share a story about a bloke that came in last week. Saskia shakes her head. Doesn't want to, really, but of course everyone seems to say, come on. Cheryl just kind of stares, but most do. Perhaps they can sense what Anthony already knows, that this is the sort of story that they would like at the dinner table. Something rectal.
Right. Well, we had this middle-aged man, bank manager he was. He had a light bulb lodged up his bottom.
Middle-aged bank manager types are always the ones not to be trusted, I'm telling you. And, this is something this is like a real story, right? Like, there's, I found something on the Daily Mail about a 53-year-old man in Colombia that it happened to. And this, frighteningly, isn't that uncommon. So everyone has a good laugh at the story. Cheryl doesn't really know how to react to it. And then Joe asks a very important follow-up question. What wattage was it? And the watt is the unit of power or radiant flux in the International System of Units, SI. It is used to quantify the rate of energy transfer. The watt is named in honour of James Watt, an 18th century Scottish inventor, mechanical engineer and chemist, who improved the Newcomen engine with his own steam engine in 1776, Watt's invention being fundamental for the Industrial Revolution. Saskia seems to be getting the vibes now with Joe. What you do with him, you sort of talk past him a little bit, so she doesn't really respond to what he says. Just saying it had been up there for quite a while, which leads Jim to come in with this killer line.
Well, what does it matter, Joe, what wattage it was?
It had been up there a while before he came in.
Bloody hell, I hope it was an energy-saving bulb.
And that's great, of course. Saskia's laughing, everyone's having a good time. Dave seems to be supping some strong cocktail of orange from a small glass. Ant's scoffing crisps. And yeah, his excuse, apparently, this guy, was that he got out the shower and sat down on a lamp. That's one of the most transparent excuses since Dave took the fall for the old fellas one during the earlier Silence for Mary. Joe just won't let it go, though. He wants his details. Was the bulb screw fit or bayonet, he asks, saying this with some seriousness. And the bayonet light bulb is the standard fitting in many former members of the British Empire, including the UK, Australia, Ireland, India and New Zealand, although not Canada, which primarily uses Edison screw sockets along with the US and Mexico. So Joe won't let it go, and Jim even fires back with a strong comedic punch to try and shut him up, but of course it doesn't work. Jim saying, what does the wattage or the type matter? The important point of the story is that there's a fella out there with a bulb stuck up his arse in A&E, not in B&Q. Very witty, off the cuff there, and despite his pink hat, Jim looks pretty peeved off at Joe now, turning to him from side on due to his faux foot thing still going, the side table behind Jim still brimming with loopy juices. So everyone laughs to this on screen as the camera just holds on Jim and Joe for the moment. Joe doesn't laugh, just asks earnestly to Saskia, why did he do it? Jim says, I don't know, boiling over now. He might have been frightened of a power cut and he wanted to go for a crap, which, doesn't really make sense, but that kind of makes it even funnier. And Jim's shaking his hands at this, gesturing as if to say, How the hell do I know? It's just a funny story that Saskia's sharing.
What does it matter, Joe, if it was a screw fit, if it was a bayonet, or what bloody wattage it was, Joe? There's a fella out there with a bulb stuck up his arse in A&E, not in B&Q.
Well, why did he do it?
I don't know, he might have been frightened of a power cut and he wanted to go for a crack.
Jim's on fire at this point, really. Barb isn't happy, though, saying he's now spoiling Saskia's lovely story. But to be honest, he's just kind of spicing it up, and admittedly already spicy tale. And Jim continues to pitch lines here, asking Saskia if she still has the bulb. You know, they could have put it on the tree. But yeah, I mean, if it survived, that can never be clean. And Barb then, as she often does, God love her, she just doesn't point blank get the joke, doesn't catch on to the playfulness here, despite often showcasing her great sense of humour. No, despite Jim doing gag after gag, she still thinks that he's being honest here, saying, don't be ridiculous. You can't put up a bulb that's been up someone's bottom on the Christmas tree. Well, yes, quite, Barb. Alright guys, and that wraps up part 1 of my thoughts on Joe's Crackers. Part 2 is available right now, it should be in your feed. Unfortunately, this episode was a little too long for Acast. Maybe I'm going a bit too long with these things, but I really can't help myself. So yes, part 2 is available now, and it's just for me to say, please get in touch with me, theroyleramblepod@gmail.com, with any thoughts you have on the show. I'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoy the show and you want to give back, you can leave us a review on iTunes, you can tell a friend, and of course you can support on Patreon as well and get exclusive access to the Grapes tapes, which is my deep dive into early doors. But yeah, see you in part 2. Bye. Hello everyone, it's Tom Quee here, back with part 2 of my thoughts on Joe's Crackers, the Royle Family Christmas special from 2010. I've done a proper intro on part 1 for this whole episode, so go back to that to check out the listener emails, and I give an update on news for the show and all that sort of good stuff. But just before we get into part 2 then, I just want to remind you to email the show, theroyleramblepod@gmail.com, if you want to give back, leave us a review on iTunes, tell a friend about the show, all that good stuff. And of course, we have the Patreon available. So if you really enjoy the show and you really want to give back, you get exclusive access there to the Grapes tapes, which is my deep dive on early doors. And there are currently 2 episodes now. The first episodes of Early Doors I have broken down over there, and there'll be a new one every month on the Patreon. But yes, let's get back into it with part 2 of my thoughts on Joe's Crackers. Joe then plies Saskia with more questioning, calling her Shitska now. Shitska. I mean, what a funny, blunt variant on Saskia, which still kind of works phonetically in terms of expression. I love Shitska. Everyone hears it, makes surprised faces. Even Cheryl seems to register some of it, aura and all. So Joe then asks Shitska, do you do any private work? Denise looks at Barb. That's all she can, really. I mean, Joe's on one at this point, isn't he? Joe is here for medical advice. He has a boil. It's a Christmas dinner, but Joe, he just seems to be here for medical advice. Turning to Saskia and saying that he's got a boil that needs looking at and he'd like a professional opinion. Saskia does ask where it is, to be fair to her, but then gets more than she bargained for with Joe's candidness, stating that the boil is about 2 inches to the left of where that bloke had his bulb lodged. Dave recoils at this. His whole body contracts as his arms cross tight. It's like a proper shiver that goes through him. Even Jim, king of the overshare, seems horrified. And I just want to say, this whole sequence really, I mean, this whole episode has been strong, but I think this is the Royle family we love, right? This is just all of them around the table, all of them sharing stories, all of them going at each other. And this whole kind of Christmas dinner set piece with Joe as this grieving absurdity at its centre, it's just marvellous. So we learn then that Joe has been recruiting Cheryl for boil duty, which, I mean, sadly makes sense. It seems Cheryl was holding the mirror the wrong way round, so she was facing her father's arse who had a boil on it. She had to look straight at it. Yeah, it's grim. And it's weird to think, you know, not to be too crass, that it's on Joe's bum now. Like, it's perhaps being sat on. You know, it's in the room with them, if you will, the boil. Barbara says, oh, Cheryl here, to Cheryl about the mirror, as if it's a really stupid thing to do. But, you know, in the kind of legacy of Cheryl mishaps, it's pretty basic, really. Hey everyone, just a quick intermission to remind you that the Grapes tapes is now available exclusively on Patreon. This is my deep dive into the classic sitcom Early Doors, written by and starring Craig Cash and Phil Mealy. So if you're enjoying the Royle Ramble and you want to hear my thoughts on that classic show Early Doors, check out the Grapes tapes. Link in the description. Cheryl then steers the conversation back to herself, saying the main reason she wanted to be a nurse was that she could marry a doctor. Everyone says, you know, as if it's a profound point or something. Saskia asks if she's seeing anyone currently, and she says, interestingly enough, that she was seeing someone recently, but they split up. It's nothing to her, though. She's over it now, she says. despite giving the exact time the relationship lasted with cold efficiency.
Are you seeing anyone at the moment, Cheryl?
I was seeing this lad up until recently, but we split up.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
No, it's fine. I'm over it now.
How long ago was it?
5 months, 3 weeks, 2 days.
Oh. 5 months, 3 weeks, 2 days, she says. Everyone with the R again. And, ever inquisitive about Sheza, asks how they met. She says they met in the precinct. Oh, the fabled precinct, where Nana's fall is still spoken about to this day. She was in the precinct having her morning pasties, and I love that phrase. It establishes an obvious routine. She was having her pasties when this little dog came up to her and she shared a bit of her morning pasty with it. Cheryl then says she heard a voice saying, if you give him any more, he'll follow you home. She looked up, and there he was, and she fancied him straight away. It's quite a charming meet cute, I'm not going to lie. How romantic, Saskia coos. Saskia seems really entranced in the story, as we all are at this point. So Cheryl said, hello, my name's Cheryl, and Saskia asks, what did you say? You know, when you said, hello, my name's Cheryl, she prods. And what did he say? Well, Cheryl didn't get the ultimate chat-up line there. He asked, have you got £1 for a cup of tea? And Denise, who has no doubt heard this all before, kind of smirks to herself a little over the story, looks to her mom, who is knowingly smiling.
I said, hello, my name's Cheryl.
And what did he say?
Have you got £1 for a cup of tea?
Oh, right.
Then he shook his paper cup at me, dead flirty like.
And what was his name, Cheryl?
Spamhead.
And yeah, that revelation that this was a homeless man, it makes the first line make more sense and also seem sadder. It wasn't a playful comment about the dog following Cheryl home. I mean, this is a man without a home. It was entirely true, and this poor dog is no doubt starving and would follow Sheza anywhere for another mouthful of glorious steak bake. Cheryl doesn't care, though. Cheryl is so lonely at this point that she's reduced herself to this, and she clearly likes to retell the story. And when I say reduced, I don't mean that as offensive to homeless people or anything like that. But, you know, I think most people wouldn't see someone shaking a cup at them and asking for money as being dead flirty, like is how she tells it. It's such a funny moment, and when she says that, you know, there's a real lusty head bob. She's, you know, she gets a kick out of reliving this. And what was his name, Cheryl? Saskia asks, still seeing the romance in the story. Well, his name was Spamhead, we hear. Cheryl delivering that as if she's a widow speaking into the wind at an ocean cliff top. Spamhead. He had lovely handwriting as well, we hear, except that he put 2 M's and 1 S in homeless. Also put an I in hungry, but as Barb rightly says in a very Barb way, it was only a few letters out. Cheryl says, yeah, very forlornly. And Spamhead, well, I mean, Spam, obviously, is a brand of processed canned pork and ham made by Hormel Foods Corporation. It was introduced in 1937 and gained popularity worldwide after its use during World War II. By 2003, Spam was sold in 41 countries on 6 continents. And I did search Spamhead as well to see if this was anything else. And apparently on Urban Dictionary, Spamhead is a common insult meaning large forehead, which, yeah, you can kind of see that. Jim has been on a taking piss rampage this episode, but for the time being, he's quite quiet listening to this. You know, he plays along. You'd expect him to be digging in at any opportunity, but he just lets Cheryl tell it. Jim even says that it's like a Mills and Boon story, and everyone agrees. And Mills and Boon is a romance imprint of British publisher Harlequin UK. It was founded in 1908 as a general publisher, and the company moved towards escapist fiction for women in the 1930s. Modern Mills and Boon novels, over 100 of which are released each month, cover a wide range of possible romantic subgenres, varying in explicitness, setting, and style, although retaining a comforting familiarity that meets readers' expectations. As of 2008, 200 million Mills and Boon novels were sold globally per annum, and in the UK, one paperback was sold on average every 6.6 seconds. Mills and Boon accounted for nearly 3/4 of the British fiction market in that year. So yes, Cheryl had a hobo boo named Spamhead. And wants more details. Did Joe ever meet him? Yes, once, Joe says. Fed up, arms folded. And after he left Joe next door, Joe couldn't find his post office savings book, which is a horrendous theft, to be honest. And Cheryl makes a face at this as if to say, oh god, this story. And postal saving systems, well, they provide depositors who do not have access to banks a safe and convenient method to save money. And many nations have operated banking systems involving post offices to promote saving money among the poor. In 1861, Great Britain became the first nation to offer such an arrangement. It was supported by Sir Rowland Hill, who successfully advocated the penny post, and William Gladstone, then Chancellor of the Exchequer, who saw it as a cheap way to finance the public debt. At the time, banks were mainly in the cities and largely catered to wealthy customers. Rural citizens and the poor had no choice but to keep their funds at home or on their pensions. So where did the book go? Well, Cheryl did some digging, asked Spamhead, and he said that the dog had probably eaten it. I mean, the irony, the thing that brought them together in the first place. Joe reasons the dog must have been able to talk as well, as Spamhead literally committed major financial fraud against Joe, going to the post office and taking out all his savings, which is outrageous. I mean, this would have been around Mary's passing, I imagine, too, which would have made matters even worse. And Jim? Well, Jim is just chuckling loudly at poor Joe and his woes. Denise then says she never liked Spamhead, so she met him there. That's interesting. She says she never took her anywhere, hoping that the next person Cheryl should go with is someone who isn't tagged. Barbie's shocked he was tagged, though. Says he was a nice lad. And what was he tagged for? Well, it turns out it was for dogging. Dogging being a British English slang term for engaging in sexual acts in a public or semi-public place or watching others do so. There may be more than 2 participants, and both group sex and gangbanging can be included. And everyone just laughs at that. Everyone erupts at that. They're having a grand old time around the table. It's grand to see. I mean, Gemini Astrid did predict that Cheryl would find love one day. I think this breaches the 2-year limit she put on herself back then. But, you know, still, Cheryl and Spamhead sitting under a tree, because, well, there's nowhere else they can go. Barb is soon thinking of other things, though. Says she can't stop looking at the 2 of them over there again. Old friends together, which, yes, is very sweet, the urns. Camera then turns across to the 2 urns on the TV set. And we can also get a better view of some of the ornaments and such. There's a large horse on the edge of the fireplace, which is arched with tinsel. There's also a card that Barb got Jim saying, "Merry Christmas, husband." "Ain't it lovely," Barb says. Everyone agrees, looking over, smiling. Joe says it'll make a nice photo, and Barbara agrees. Goes to get the camera. Jim says it's Christmas Day, not Halloween, and she chuckles and just rolls with it. Joe has to be in the photo, and the 2 of them go across. And with Joe off the table, Jim leans across to Saskia and says he doesn't know about losing his wife, but he's lost the plot. I mean, it's harsh yet again. Saskia laughs awkwardly. I mean, in all honesty, he's just getting old, Jim, and he's been dealt a mighty blow as he's been aging. Dave laughs a little, and then the photos get started, with Joe smiling widely, first of all, with both of the urns in the crook of his arm. It's not exactly respectful or reverent in the traditional sense, but, you know, he's enjoying himself at least. And Barb, I should say, is using a disposable camera here, which by 2010 was pretty much unheard of. I mean, we're before the era where everyone has an iPhone, but we were kind of in the digital camera realm at this point. But there is something really charming about a disposable one still. Joe doesn't want to cause offence, but he then asks if he can just have one of just him and Mary and Cheryl, a family one. Of course, Barbara doesn't mind, really. Cheryl gets up smiling and heads down to the shoot. And Jim is on top form this episode and gets in a funny little barb saying they've had more fun with them now, Mary and Barbara, than when they were alive, which is, you know, knowingly cruel, and everyone does guffaw. So they get together, dad and daughter, and pose for the first photograph, of which we get many coming in a montage shortly, which is clicked on screen and shown as the real thing with a sepia tinge. It's a nice decision here. It kind of, not that the episode's been dragging in any way, but there have been like just long dialogue scenes. So it's nice, you know, similarly when we found out Jim's secret upstairs as Alicia Dixon plays, this just ups the pace a bit. So yes, we get our first photo. It's Cheryl with her arm around a smiling Joe, holding up the urn between them. Her face a bit bewildered, while his warm and content. And a really nice song then begins to play. It's called Memories Are Made of This, a popular song about nostalgia, written in 1955 by Terry Gilson, Richard Dare and Frank Miller. They were the members of a 3-piece group called the Easy Riders, who served as a backing band for Dean Martin's version of this song, also released in 1955. And yeah, thus begins a really enjoyable montage, which is made up of snapshots. There's Dave and Denise beside the others smiling, holding the urns. There's Saskia and Anthony, interestingly looking a bit unhappy. And less so, but Saskia clearly doesn't really want to be holding these urns and posing for photos. Perhaps it's her nursing background that causes her to find this all a bit gauche or disrespectful, or perhaps her base humanity. I mean, it's harmless, but I can see how it could be perceived as bad taste, despite the intention. Ant and Dave are next, and whilst Ant is a bit smilier this time, Dave is full-on toothy grin, holding the urn aloft and bearing a bit of his belly at the same time. And then we see Joe almost as the Statue of Liberty with his tiara. He's holding Mary's urn like a torch aloft. And then we do get very disrespectful, but nobody seems to mind, as Dave is shown playing the urns goonishly as a pair of bongos, then being held aloft by Denise mostly, who's out of shot holding them up. And then, even worse, with a surprising culprit, is Anthony, holding the urns up to his chest like some Beverly Macker bosoms. I mean, it's probably the most disrespectful thing you can do with these, bar a few things. Like, my God, Anthony, have a bit of respect for your grandmother, as well as the kindly lady who gave you money for singing the birdie song. There's then a big family shot of everyone bar Jim, as Denise and Saskia cheers the urns together as if clinking glasses of wine. We even see Barb watching this happen closely and her smiling at it in joy as the photo is taken. There's then one final shot as Jim is held aloft, pulling a quite unnerving grimace, eyes wide and teeth baring as he holds the urn in his hands whilst being held in Ant and Dave's grasps. Both of them fighting through the struggle to put on a happy smile for the photos. I mean, as long as they look good in the photo, who cares? You know, they could have a ironing burn mark on the back of their clothes and we'd never know. We then fade out and into my personal favourite aspect of Christmas, the ginormous amount of leftovers. We're in the kitchen now and the table is jam-packed with bowls of stuffing and sprouts and a huge turkey. I mean, you know, it is the most wonderful time. We then get a scene that we've never really had before, a combination we've never really had before, a pairing you don't traditionally see one-on-one in the show. I mean, you know, we've got plenty of Denise and Jim and Dave and Jim and Barb and Norma, but you never really just get Barb and her fave son, Anthony. So Barb's in the kitchen first of all, now rocking a tiered Christmas cake hat with a Santa on top. Ant comes in and says thanks for such a lovely day, popping a beer can with a pleasing crunch. Jim can be heard being boisterous in the next room, and Barb says she hopes Saskia is enjoying herself. You know, what with Jim and all, he can be a bit off-putting, some might say.
He can be a bit off-putting, you know. His dirty habits, his personality, his body odour.
Well, we've never known any different, have we?
No.
The way Barbara counts these things off. And body odour is something about Jim that you never actually, you sort of don't think about because you don't really get to experience it as you were there, obviously. But I would imagine there is a real staleness and maybe an aggressive BO to Jim. I mean, Barbara's told us prior that he only has a wash when he's going to the doctors. And, oh God, can you imagine his armpits? You wouldn't want to spend your bank holidays there. So Ant laughs at this list, says they've never known any different, which doesn't really reply to the Saskia point, you know. And Barb then regales Ant with a tale from the front. Apparently Jim dropped a silent one in front of Saskia during Come Dine With Me, and the poor girl must have smelt it. How could she not, Barb says. And Come Dine With Me is a British reality series that has aired on Channel 4 since the 10th of January 2005 and is narrated by Dave Lamb.
She must have smelt it, but she couldn't not. It was one of his Sunday ones. But she didn't say anything. Just politely put a tissue to her nose, kept it there for 10 minutes until it had evaporated. You know, she's really classy.
Well, I wonder about me dad.
And I love this phrase. She says it was one of his Sunday ones. Like, what does that actually mean? I mean, of course, he's eating his Sunday roast, the sprout impact, etc. But the fact that his Sunday ones, you know, they've been given this status is brilliant. Even Ant groans when he hears it, as if, blimey, Saskia had to deal with a Sunday one. She didn't say a peep, though, did Shitska? Simply keeping a tissue to her nose for 10 minutes until it had evaporated. Something Barb terms as really classy. I mean, poor Saskia, she's watching contestants drop 7s in the back of the taxi whilst Jim drops 2s next to her. I love that idea as well, that the tissue evaporated as well, torn apart by the fumigation. It's a good sign though, in general, isn't it? Because Jim will never change, ever. So she needs to adapt where she can if she wants to be part of the family. We then get sentimental again in a really cute way. Barb says she's loved having him back. Asks if he can't let Barb come stay with him. Can he? And it's a nice echoing of Norma back in the day when she stayed at the Royals with her eyes and, you know, making it clear in a not so subtle way that she'd love to stay at the Royals permanently. They laugh. Ant says that Saskia wouldn't mind a jot, and I'm sure she really wouldn't, to be honest. I mean, how could you not love Barb? She's no trouble. She's as perfect a mother-in-law as Jim is rotten as a father-in-law. Ant says Saskia thinks the world of Barb. Says she's really lovely. Barb says she's really lovely and hugs her son. Which, yeah, I mean, Saskia's kind of a dream daughter-in-law, isn't she? Like, imagine you had Denise. Which, yeah, I mean, Saskia's kind of a dream daughter-in-law, isn't she? Evaporating tissue and all. Ant agrees. Says she might be the one. Barb says, really? I mean, you know, he maybe said this about Emma too, but more on her in a moment. Ant then reveals something which is going to be the key closing plot point of the episode. He's only planning of thinking of asking Saskia to marry him on New Year's Eve. Barb can't believe it. Hugs her son really tightly, rubs his back, looks at him so lovingly when they pull back. Tears in her eyes. It's tremendous acting from Sue Johnston as always, but that goes without saying. Like, with Barbara, you never feel like she's acting. With any of them, really, but especially with Barbara, Sue's performance is just dynamite. So you're going to propose here, she says. Ant says he wants to say yes and all, so it won't be in the lounge, which is, you know, how prophetic. 2 royal weddings in 1 year, Barb says, as an obvious, if clever line. But as with these type of things, get ready for the writers to pound it in the ground. Not in a bad way or now, it's just the rhythm of the show, you know, back from the beginning. 2 royal weddings in 1 year is this edition's Golden Egg Cup, or Congleton, or Computer in a Bag, etc. Barb jokes that she hopes the Queen doesn't wear the same hat as she will, and, you know, I'm happy to report that they didn't clash. Barb jokes that she hopes the Queen doesn't wear the same hat as she will. And I think they're married by the time we get to the next episode, by the time we get to the Barbara's old ring. I don't believe there's a mention of them though, but we can assume. We don't know what Barb wore, but I guess she wouldn't have worn the same as the Queen, who rocked that very memorable yellow monstrosity. And it's interesting too that they include all this mention of the royal wedding, because the engagement was only announced on November 16th, 2010, and this episode came out on Christmas Day, so they didn't have too long to get it embedded. And the royal wedding, of course, I'm having to spell it the proper way there annoyingly, is the wedding of Prince William and Catherine Middleton, which took place on Friday the 29th of April 2011 at Westminster Abbey in London, England. William was second in the line of succession to the British throne at the time, later becoming heir apparent. The couple have been in a relationship since 2003. The viewing figures for the event have been the subject of much speculation, with Jeremy Hunt, Culture Secretary, estimating that 2 billion people would watch the wedding. Following the event, this figure was duly reported by the media, but was criticised by some news outlets for being inaccurate and unfounded. Estimated figures included a peak audience of 26.3 million viewers and a total of 36.7 million watching at least some part of the wedding coverage in the UK. And again, I'm not trying to, write a fan fiction bit of the royal family or whatever, but I think an episode as well in this hypothetical 4th season where they would be watching the royal wedding and reacting to it would have been really cool as well. Barb then hugs Ant again at the end of the scene. "Come here," Ant says, and Barb says, "Oh, I love you, Anthony." It's incredibly sweet and heartwarming. "I'm so happy for you," she says at the close of the scene, her voice slightly muffled by his shirt. We're back in the lounge now, and Joe is showing Saskia some photos from back in the day.
Now, that's me and Mary at Harry Ramsden's. Well, and that one's on the beach. That's Mary in that deck chair.
Yeah. Have you got any of Mary before she was in the urn, Joe?
Oh, no, she didn't like a photo taking a swastika.
Tons to discuss here. I mean, first of all, Blackpool Tower is a tourist attraction, of course, in Blackpool, Lancashire, England, which was opened to the public in May 1894. When it opened, it was the tallest man-made structure in the British Empire. Inspired by the Eiffel Tower in Paris, it is 518 feet tall and is the 125th tallest freestanding tower in the world. So, yes, they do the classic misdirect here, and I think this might be one of my fave jokes of the whole episode. I mean, the switch up from what you think is a sweet old man showing photos of, days gone by, loved one on holiday, etc. It's not that. It's actually a deranged old man showing photos of his deceased wife's urn in these classic seaside snap hotspots. It's amazing. It really shocked me and made me laugh when I saw it on rewatch. The reality is much more depressing though. The idea that Joe has recently gone out with the urn and taken all these. Jim is just listening to this, pained. Obviously hasn't moved from the table. Making a cuckoo sign to Saskia after Joe tops it all off by calling her swastika. Another really smart variant of Saskia. I mean, they really rinse it for all it's worth, this joke, and I love it. At first, it's so shocking that it doesn't even really land, but yeah, Joe just did refer to Anthony's soon-to-be fiancée as swastika. And the swastika, of course, is an ancient religious and cultural symbol, predominantly found in various Eurasian cultures, as well as some African and American ones. In the Western world, it is more widely recognised as a symbol of the German Nazi Party, who appropriated it from Asian cultures starting in the early 20th century. And this appropriation continues with its use by neo-Nazis around the world. The swastika, though, never stopped being used as a symbol of divinity and spirituality in Indian religions, including Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. I mean, Joe is a tad loopy, no juice needed, that can't be denied, but he's also in the throes of grief, and Saskia seems to understand this better than anyone. Asking, why are they all of the urn Mary and not, the OG Mary? Well, she didn't like having a photo taken, apparently, which, I mean, I've kind of got a bone to pick with that one as well, as we did literally see her having a photo taken at Anthony's 18th, but it's a nice way to land the joke, undeniably. It's just not really the picture I have of Mary. The Beverly Callard videos, the meatloaf, the not liking photographs. I mean, I'm getting very defensive over Mary here, I'll grant you. Saskia tries to change the subject, but keeps it on theme. Offers a scanned photo of the baby in her bag for Joe to look at. He says, "Oh yes." He seems interested, and then just quickly says, "No thanks." Joe is not looking at Jim, who is taking the piss out of him, trying to get Saskia to laugh. Popping some crackers on his head as Joe says how Anthony's a smashing lad and now she's on to a winner. Saskia chuckles at Jim openly, and Joe then dredges up the past again. Says he much prefers Saskia to Anthony's last girlfriend, Emma. Oh, Emma getting mentioned, damn.
I much prefer you to his last girlfriend, Emma.
Oh, thanks, Joe.
She was much better looking than you, but you've got a better personality.
Right.
And Emma getting shots out of nowhere. I mean, to be fair, Saskia is more amenable to the elderly, due to her job, her disposition. Emma was a bit different, wasn't she? Her vibe was more rebel with rich parents. Her and Twiggy probably have more in common than her and Joe. Saskia takes it in her stride, though. Doesn't get annoyed like Denise would over Beverly Macker being mentioned. Joe then does hit her with a bit of a slobber knocker, though.
Well, looks fade, don't they?
Oh, aye. But not in her case. I saw her last week and she was still bloody gorgeous.
Eesh! Jim's cackling at this, but it is shocking, you know. Saskia doesn't seem to mind, though. She's well within her rights to get annoyed here, but just allows it to ride. But looks do fade, she says, sanguinely. Well, they do in most cases, Joe agrees, but not in this case. He saw her last week and she was still bloody gorgeous. So that's interesting. Emma's still in the local area then. I guess they do have Lewis, her and Aunt, don't they? I wonder if she's still in Altrincham. I wonder where Joe and Emma's paths would have actually crossed. Joe chuckles at this too, the thought of her. And, you know, to be honest, it's in a non-objectifying way, of course. Sheridan Smith is a very beautiful woman, and I'm a huge fan of her in general. I actually saw her live in London. London? Yeah, live in London. Maybe about, I think it was April, May time. I saw her in a leading role in Rufus Wainwright's adaptation of the John Cassavetes film, Opening Night. The play wasn't received very well, unfortunately, and it did close early, but she was very good in it. She basically sort of plays an actress who witnesses a girl being run over on the opening night of a new play and is kind of haunted by it. It's based on the classic film, the 70s film, and it's a musical in this case. And, you know, Sheridan has some pipes on, and no doubt she was terrific. And it was a thrill, really, to see Emma up there. Wafer thin ham or not. Oh, he's a cheery conversationalist, isn't he? Joe then goes from telling Saskia she ain't much of a looker to dwelling on the sadness of her job. It's a hard job being a nurse, he says. She says sometimes, as Jim has the crackers out again and is now staring straight through them as binoculars. And yet, at this point, I just want to unpack the title I mentioned before. You know, there's no Kane in Citizen Kane. Joe doesn't have any crackers in Joe's Crackers. But obviously, it's more of a clever sort of pun, isn't it? It's like Joe's Crackers. Joe's lost it. Like, I really like that, actually. It's subtly hilarious in that very raw family way. So Saskia laughs again at Jim, and it's pleasing, you know, to see them having this moment. And Joe is talking about Saskia, asking about Saskia, but of course he's still dwelling on his own things. Do you tell them or leave it a surprise when someone's going to die, he says. It was a surprise for Joe, I imagine, too. I mean, it sounded before in the Golden Egg Cup that Mary was just badly incontinent, but I appreciate that this often presages other things. And Saskia just rolls with it here. Her bedside manner is impeccable, and Joanna Froggatt gives a stellar performance throughout. She really hangs in there with all the heavyweights of the cast, no problem. Saskia pauses on her answer, says every case is different. Joe says it was as much as a surprise to him as it was to Mary when she expired. And he knows she wasn't planning on dying because she just bought a 2011 diary, which is a sad thought. Another diary mentioned too. Saskia, as we know, enjoys a good diary, and everyone else enjoys a good look at hers. Jim is then cut to when he mentions the diary, but doesn't really do anything, just kind of listens and holds his drink. Saskia says that's a shame, and Joe tells her not to tell Barb, as poor Joe, he's just regifted the diary as a present to Barbara. I mean, we have known him in the past struggling to know what to buy, you know, old Barb had to buy his present for Mary without him knowing, a cardigan from Marks. Jim again just listens here. He's clearly a bit saddened by what he's hearing. Like when Denise spoke about old Frank down the bus shelter. Joe is telling Saskia not to tell Barbara, not out of the shame of regifting though, rather that some folk get upset about getting second-hand diaries from dead people, which, I mean, yeah, I guess they do. It isn't even truly second-hand either if she hadn't written in it, so he doesn't need to feel bad, you know. It would have been worse maybe if she'd started it but then never finished. So Jim again is just there. He's kind of stunned now at just what Joe said, the nonsense of it, the second-hand, you know, dead people diary idea. His mouth's agape. And when Joe then parts about the light bulb again, back to this blooming light bulb. When Joe speaks about this, Jim finally mouths off and releases a pent-up "bloody hell, Joe," as Saskia laughs hard at this defence. We then cut to the main sofa, with Cheryl sitting on the side cushion that she always tended to perch on, and Aunt beside her in the middle of the sofa. Cheryl with a giant Christmas bucket of popcorn with the writing, "It's Christmas," on the side. Aunt says it'll be really weird with them not living next door anymore, which, to be fair, I mean, he doesn't live there anymore, but, you know, it's more of a psychic thing, the inference is, I suppose. I guess it would be surreal, just the reality of knowing that Joe and Cheryl aren't there and Mary's already gone. Cheryl agrees that it'll be weird, and Aunt says that he'll really miss Cheryl. Always thought of her like his elder sister. Oh, Aunt! How is he so generous with his money and so sweet? I mean, he's such a treasure. And yeah, I can kind of see that kind of relationship between them, especially early on when Aunt would sort of insult Cheryl, saying she'd be wearing a tent for the wedding in the kitchen and stuff like that. And Aunt does have an older sister, of course, you know, he says that, but calls Cheryl the nice one. And she's so moved by this. Still eating, but clearly really moved. Says Saskia's really lovely. Aunt agrees. And Cheryl then asks about Aunt's Lewis, who we haven't really had reference of since Queen of Sheba. But apparently him and Saskia get on really well. He's at Emma's tonight, you know, no doubt with Roger, playing big shot with the parlour games and the like. And that Aunt and Saskia are going to be picking up Lewis on Boxing Day. Cheryl then asks how they met. I mean, she's so curious, this Cheryl. Says that he saw her first as a nurse when he was visiting a mate. Not even a good mate, he said. I mean, this Anthony, he's just visiting anyone. And after he spotted Saskia, he started going every night. good mate or no good mate. Cheryl then changes the tone. Says the nurses were really lovely in the hospital when Mary was ill. There must have been a really difficult time, Anthony says. She says, of course. And then the writers employ that trusty old mechanism of a misdirect. And this is one of the all-time greats here from Cheryl.
The nurses were really lovely in the hospital where my mum was when she was ill.
Must have been a really difficult time.
Yeah, it was. I used to go every day. One morning I turned up and they switched the machine off.
What, a life support machine?
No, the vending machine in the corridor.
All right.
Ant just says, oh right, happily enough there, but shakes his head too. Cheryl does swap machines in that story with alarming speed. You practically get whiplash from thinking it's about enforced death into them being about a Kit Kat being out of reach. There's then a moment as Ant pauses and Cheryl digs into the bucket. He leans over to her and shares his very important information.
Don't tell anyone, but thinking of asking Saskia to marry me on New Year's Eve.
Cheryl gets mad excited about the proposal, screams Anthony but quietly, eats a crisp inconspicuously, and the two of them hug, her still holding the bowl. I mean, why wouldn't you be thrilled? Saskia really is lovely, and that's the first thing that Denise says at the start of the next scene. And we don't really see too much Denise in this episode, if this makes sense. I mean, she's there, of course, all the time, but she kind of has less to do, less to say than the rest. So Denise begins by saying Saskia's lovely, she's with Barb in the kitchen, and Barb is effervescent at the news that she knows.
Don't say anything, but our Anthony's thinking of asking her to marry him on New Year's Eve.
Lovely to see Denise overjoyed too for her baby brother. They squeal, and Denise then says half of the catchphrase of the day, 2 raw weddings, with Barb finishing off the rest for her. Cheryl then comes in, and we can see on the fridge that there are various magnets for old brands of the days of yore. Quaker Oats and Fry's chocolate, although, not to house shame or anything, but Christ. Here you can see that the kitchen paper and the light switch are basically caked in dirt, with the white switch almost blended in as camouflage to the browning peel. Regardless, Cheryl is all smiles as she enters, says again that Saskia is lovely, checks for anyone listening in the hallway, and reveals the news that they already know, of course, and, they finish off the 2 raw weddings in 1 year. It's darling, really, that everyone who knows immediately says, and you can't even keep anything quiet here, can you? We then cut to another rare pairing, Ant and Dave. Ant is talking about his work do. Dave, can in hand, is happy to hear about it. Says that he's had his work do as well, but first wants to hear what Ant did. It was a right swanky affair by the sounds of it. The company hired the Grosvenor in London. And Dave proper squeaks at this. The Grosvenor! I'm not certain he really knows what that is, but he's excited nonetheless. So yeah, it was a proper black tie thing, free drinks all night, JLS were there, and there was even a casino where everyone got £100 worth of chips. Dang, chips at the Grosvenor. Dave can't believe it. I mean, again, as you say, he probably doesn't know what the Grosvenor is. He's probably thinking of the wrong type of chips, but, regardless, I'd rather have the other type, to be honest, as well. And the Grosvenor, of course, being a luxury hotel that opened in 1929 in the Mayfair area of London, England. Across from Hyde Park, the house is built on the former site of the 19th century aristocratic Grosvenor House residence. And JLS are an English boy band consisted of members Aston Marigold, Ortiz Williams, Marvin Humes and J.B. Gill. They initially signed to Tracklace's production company New Track City, and then went on to become the runners-up of the 5th series of the ITV reality talent show The X Factor in 2008, coming second to Alexandra Burke. Following their appearance on The X Factor, they signed to Epic Records, and their first 2 singles, Beat Again and Everybody in Love, both went to number 1 on the UK single chart.
Kicked off with cocktails, it was free drink all night, and then JLS were on stage.
JLS?
And then they had this casino thing and everybody got £100 worth of chips.
Chips? At the Grosvenor?
Ant kind of frowns at Dave's responses as he's regaling him, perhaps thinking he's turned particularly idiotic, or perhaps just pauses. He then asks what Dave did on his, which, you just know, whatever it is, it's not going to top that, is it? Well, it started in the feathers, and then it ended up in the feathers. And where did you go in between, Ant asks. Well, the feathers. And the quick way Craig Cash delivers the final feathers is fantastic. I mean, we all knew how this was going to go down, right?
Well, it started off in the feathers, and it ended up in the feathers.
Oh, where'd you go in between?
The feathers.
Ant nods and Dave reveals it was a joint do, with Diarrhea Pete the roofer and Shaky Dave the electrician. Prefixes you don't really want associated with either profession. Ant tries to see the sunny side though, asks if it was a bit of a sesh with these guys. Dave says it weren't though. They both said they had to go after one, which is a bit sad for old Dave, as he thinks afterwards he saw them in the Oak when he was going home. I mean, we had Dave ducking the neighbours in the last special, and now here he tells us about Pete and Shaky Dave hiding from him as he went past. Ant sups his beer at this and doesn't really have anything to say back. You know, it's funny at Dave's expense, but where was his best mate Gary, you know, or any of the other people we've heard of, Bob the Spark or Flatnose Alan and the like? Poor Dave. I mean, you know, he's clearly not what he used to be. He's not the cheeky chappy who can fire back to the family, but it's sad to think he has no friends either. No one wants to hang out with him, which grimly is understandable. We're back in the kitchen then, and Barb is saying she's really going to miss Cheryl. Denise is saying the kids all really miss her. She's been a brilliant godmother, and then we hear quite how brilliant she's been.
You've been a brilliant godmother.
Oh, thanks, Denise.
You've potty trained him, you taught him to read and write, went to all the parents' evenings for us. You've been everything a godmother should be.
So amazing. Not only has she been a constant babysitter, but she has undeniably been their actual parent, been their mother, really, too. Done things that only a parent really should do, including going to parents' evening. That's incredible. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if the school just think Cheryl is the mom. You know, it's probably better that way, isn't it, for everyone? And you can tell that Cheryl really does love these kids, too. Really does see them as her own. Her eyes are misty. She looks down emotionally, not an iota of resentment towards Denise like any reasonable person would have. I mean, I'm sure the kids probably see Cheryl more as mom than vodka and Red Bull Denise. There's a brilliant moment too, when Cheryl says that she wishes she could just take them with her. And you see Denise weigh it up for a second. You know, she looks at Barb, who delivers a cold, curt no. And then Denise turns back to Cheryl, lip at an angle as if to say, oh well.
I really love them, Denise. You know, I wish wherever I go, I could just take them with me.
No.
She really would have taken that offer too if Barb wasn't standing in her way. No doubt about that. Barbara then asks Cheryl if she wants a Bailey's. Pours her a giant one, and the three of them then imagine Mary and Norma up in heaven, getting a drink from St. Peter's cabinet, as Denise says. And Barb just continues to pour and pour. I mean, it is Christmas after all. And Bailey's, well, Bailey's Irish Cream is an Irish cream liqueur made of cream, cocoa and Irish whiskey emulsified together with vegetable oil. It is made in Dublin Island and in Mallusk, Northern Ireland. And St. Peter's drink cabinet, well, Denise is clearly intimating towards the Pearly Gates, which is an informal name for the gateway of heaven according to some Christian denominations. It is inspired by the description of New Jerusalem in Revelation, quote, the 12 gates were 12 pearls, each gate made of a single pearl. The image of the gates in popular culture is a set of large gold, white or wrought iron gates in the clouds guarded by St. Peter, the keeper of the keys to the kingdom. Those not fit to enter heaven are denied entrance at the gates and descend into hell. Barb then invokes, so we're talking about heaven now. Barb then invokes a cavalcade of lost legends, mostly musicians, interestingly. So she talks about Jimi Hendrix, Michael Jackson, Kurt Cobain, and that little fella from Different Strokes. Well, let's unpack these all quickly. Jimi Hendrix was an American guitarist, songwriter and singer. He is widely regarded as one of the greatest guitarists in the history of popular music and one of the most influential musicians of the 20th century. Michael Jackson was an American singer, songwriter, dancer and philanthropist. Dubbed the King of Pop, he is regarded as one of the most significant cultural figures of the 20th century. Kurt Cobain was an American musician who was the lead vocalist, guitarist, primary songwriter and founding member of the grunge band Nirvana. For his angsty songwriting and anti-establishment persona, his compositions widen the thematic conventions of mainstream rock music. And finally, that little fella from Different Strokes is Gary Coleman. And Gary Coleman was an American actor known as a high-profile childhood star of the late 70s and 80s. He caught the attention of a producer after acting in a pilot for a revival of The Little Rascals, who decided to cast him as Arnold Jackson in the sitcom Different Strokes. So yeah, this is interesting, isn't it? Because the Royal Family is all about references to all different aspects of culture. I would imagine Barb knows who Gary Coleman is. You know, Michael Jackson, Jimi Hendrix, I guess. But Kurt Cobain, I mean, okay, he's a world famous guy, don't get me wrong, like everyone knows who Kurt Cobain is. But it just is odd to hear Kurt Cobain coming out of Barb's mouth here. And to think of those guys all up there with Mary and Norma. They all cheer and drink their glasses. And for a second, you see Cheryl's glass side on. And there's a cartoon on it. Now, I would love this to be Frank Sidebottom, because obviously Chris Seavey and Carolyn Ahern have this interesting past, and Mrs. Merton was involved early on with Frank Sidebottom, etc. But yeah, it would be awesome if that was an in-joke. I think my brain is forcing me to see it as a Frank Sidebottom thing. It's very hard to see. But if they did that as a nod and wink, as they often do, they've often referenced, like, the Fast Show and stuff, which obviously Craig and Caroline were part of. So, they have done this prior. But in my head, Frank Sidebottom's on Cheryl's glass. But do let me know, the rawramble@gmail.com. What do you see on Chez's glass of Bailey's? So we've known Joe to be hapless in the past, what with, freezer dropping on both of his big toes, just like Jim. Or when, we actually see him come back from the hospital after a cheese grating incident. So we know Joe to be hapless, but it does seem to have ran in the family, as Denise then reminisces on when Cheryl years back, got her head stuck in the railings outside. And soon enough, both Joe and Mary were stuck there too.
Remember that time, Cheryl, when you got your head stuck in the railings and your mum came down to help and she got her head stuck and all?
Yeah.
And then your dad came down and he got his head stuck too.
Oh, yeah.
No, the firemen were taking photos.
And they even popped it in the Metro, with the winning caption for the competition being, "Don't feed the animals." I bet Mary did mind having that taken, but that is a great bit of history for these characters, and clearly a treasured story they've told many times. Mary is then mentioned again, as apparently back in the day she went to a priest as she thought she had the stigmata, but it was only eczema in the end and she was dead disappointed. And stigmata in Catholicism are bodily wounds, scars and pains, which appear in locations corresponding to the crucifixion wounds of Jesus Christ, those being the hands, wrists, feet, near the heart and the head. And St. Francis of Assisi is widely considered the first recorded stigmatic. An eczema, also known as dermatitis, is a term used for different types of skin inflammation, typically characterised by itchiness, redness and a rash. We're hearing a lot of troubling things about the characters we love in this episode. I mean, we've gone through Jim and the Keyhole and Saskia. We then hear that, Mary wore blackface in public. Not an amazing memory to dredge up, to be honest.
And what about when she won the fancy dress at the Feathers as Desmond Tutu?
Yeah. But she hadn't gone as him, had she? Who did she go as?
Sean Wright Phillips.
Yeah. Sean Wright Phillips.
Barb remembering it as her being Desmond Tutu at the Feathers there. But it wasn't even him though. It was apparently Sean Wright Phillips. So Desmond Tutu, of course, was a South African Anglican bishop and theologian, known for his work as an anti-apartheid and human rights activist. He was Bishop of Johannesburg from 85 to 86, and then Archbishop of Cape Town from 86 to 96, in both cases being the first black African to hold the position. And Sean Wright Phillips is an English former professional footballer who played as a winger. He played in the Premier League and Football League for Man City, Chelsea and Queen's Park Rangers, and also in the MLS for the New York Red Bulls. I mean, why? Again, I think it's like the workout video or the Cheryl Cole picture or anything like that. There isn't an explanation as to why Mary went as Sean Wright Phillips. I guess he's a Man City player, but why was she dressed as him? In what world? I hope no photos were taken, but a fancy dress night at the Feathers does sound top, but still, Mary, what the hell? We're back to Dave and Ant now. Dave asking how Lewis is. He sounds like a real winner. He played the violin solo at school. Dave and Denise's lot, though? Well, at the nativity the other day, Denise couldn't go because she was waiting for the DNA results on Jeremy Kyle, which, wow, I mean, she knows about ketchup, doesn't she? Struth. And what about little Norma? Anne asks. And, it's nice to hear that name. She played the Virgin Mary, but apparently she couldn't remember any words, so she just did a forward roll, which, is very nativity, isn't it? Apparently got the acting bug now and all. And Mary, the Virgin Mary, was a 1st century Jewish woman of Nazareth, the wife of Joseph and the mother of Jesus. She is an important figure of Christianity, venerated under various titles such as Virgin or Queen, many of them mentioned in the Liturgy of Loreto. So little Norma was in the Nativity, and little David was in it too. He was one of the 3 wise men. I think I was one of those back in the day, actually. And in Christianity, the biblical magi, also known as the 3 wise men, 3 kings, and 3 magi, are distinguished foreigners who visit Jesus after his birth, bearing gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh in homage to him. They are commemorated on the feast day of Epiphany, sometimes called 3 Kings Day, and commonly appear in the nativity celebrations of Christmas. So baby David was the one with the wet patch standing at the back waving. Dave saying there wasn't a prouder parent in there with those two, and yes, well, at least you were there, Dave. I mean, it doesn't matter what your kids do, really. It matters that you were there whilst Denise was... Well, where was she? She was elsewhere, right? And Ant then goes to tell Dave about his news.
Hey, Dave, don't say anything, but I'm thinking of asking Saskia to marry me on New Year's Eve.
No.
Yeah?
Oh, Ant.
Yeah.
Honest?
Yeah.
Oh, come here. Oh.
Cheers, Dave.
Brilliant.
Yes, cheers.
Dave saying, no, honest, like a little kid when someone gives them something for free. He seems so overjoyed, and the two of them share a massive bear hug. Dave opening his arms and inviting Ant to get down and embrace him. It's a lovely moment to witness from these two, and, it's at times like these when you ponder the relationship between Dave and Ant as well. I mean, they are family. At this point, Ant has known Dave for pretty much his entire adult life. And it's times like this, these little interactions, that elevate this episode above, say, the golden egg cup, as it lands these quite powerful emotional moments that feel very true to these characters that we love so dearly. Dave says brilliant, taps Ant's back lovingly, and, for an elongated while, we just get that man-to-man contact in. We don't get much in these specials. We don't get much absent TV watching or whacking food with Darren in silence. But here, they just let the whole thing linger. It's a really human beat in a show that mostly now continually washes the turkey, so to speak. And as this scene ends, we see Dave just holding his beer, exhaling in astonishment, eyes bulging. And then we're back in the kitchen with Cheryl, who's crying, Denise drying her tears with a tea towel. I don't want to move, she says. It's him. Because the house has too many memories. It's a really sad line, that is. And Barb says she can understand that. And then Cheryl just comes in with a sucker punch.
It's me dad. He wants to move because the house has got too many memories.
Oh, well, I can understand that, love.
But I love those memories. I don't think he can get over what's happened. I think he's having a breakdown.
Oh, Cheryl, I think you're worrying unnecessarily. I mean, what's making you think that?
I don't know.
Superbly written moment. It's tragic, but there's so many well-judged lines here. Saying, but I love those memories, which has Denise and Barb at a loss. Denise kindly rubbing her best mate's back as that's all she can really do here. I don't think he can get over it, Cheryl says. And the show suddenly gets all very real all of a sudden. I don't think he can get over it, Cheryl says. And then all at once the show becomes very real, very suddenly. I mean, Joe has lost the light of his life. At his old age too. I mean, first Norma gone, now Mary. It's becoming quite desperately sad, at this point. I think he's having a breakdown, Cheryl says, breaking down herself at this. Terrific acting from Jessica Hines here, but yeah, that really goes without saying. She's lost in her tears. It's all coming out and it's all too much, and poor Cheryl. She's got Denise's kids to raise on top of all this too. Barbara tries to put a spin on it though. Says she's worrying unnecessarily. What's making her think that? Yeah, I wonder what's making her think that, Barb. Barb then squeezes past the bulging table of a good Christmas dinner well had. We can see gravy and Pyrex, open ketchup, a big turkey carcass that's been attacked from one side with some pigs in blankets too. So Barb moves past this, nudges her head into the living room, and Jim is just there supping quietly as Joe is leaning over with the urn next to his head, stroking it lovingly, clutching it. Denise then looks across too and pulls her face with her bottom lip before they return to comforting Cheryl. Barb filling her Bailey's glass, Denise passing her a thick wadge of Christmas cake. Both of them really mothering her as she cries between bites and sips. Denise even wiping the snot from her nose in a tender way. I'm surprised she even knows how to do that, to be honest, Denise. And then we're back to Joe and Jim now. The angle closer so it's just the two of them in frame. Loads of cans and the decorations still behind. Joe says he really misses her, that she was the brains of the operation, which, yeah, I mean, you can see that plainly. It is brutal that she's gone here, Mary, isn't it? And Peter Martin is bereft.
Oh, I really miss her, Jim. I'm lost without her. She was the brains of the outfit.
Hey? Oh, I know that. I know she was, Joe. I remember when she was on jury service and she got that confused that she owned up to the murders herself.
Yeah, that was her. That was my Mary.
So everyone's sharing Mary anecdotes and Jim drops a doozy here. So apparently Mary got so confused once on jury duty that she confessed to the murders herself. And it's great to see Joe laugh deep at this. And this seems to confirm that it actually happened, like Jim's septic testicle or Denise leaving baby David covered in all that ciggy ash the whole day, waiting for Dave to take a photo. These things really went down. And jury duty or jury service is a service as a juror in a legal proceeding. Different countries have different approaches to juries. Variations include the kinds of cases tried before a jury, how many jurors hear a trial, and whether the layperson is involved in a single trial or holds a paid job similar to a judge but without legal training. According to 2016 figures from the Ministry of Justice, there is about a 35% chance of people in England and Wales being summoned for jury service over the course of their lifetime. In Scotland, the percentage is much higher due to having a lower population, as well as having juries made up of 15 people, as opposed to 12 in England and Wales. She lit up every room, Joe says quite rightly. And Jim then again pulls us right back to the end of 2010, saying that the Chilean miners could have done with her. Another nice current cultural reference there. And the Chilean miners is of course a reference to the 2010 Copiapo mining accident, also known as the Chilean mining accident, which began on the 5th of August 2010 with a cave-in at the San Jose copper gold mine, located in the Atacama Desert in northern Chile. 33 men were trapped 700 metres underground and 5 kilometres from the mine's entrance, and they were rescued after 69 days. In the years after the accident, although initially they enjoyed worldwide fame, gifts of motorcycles and invitations to Disney World and the Greek islands, many spiralled, suffering psychologically and financially. Some found that they could not get new mining jobs due to the concerns that potential employers had about their mental health and the publicity that could follow. Some, like Jorge Gallegos, adapted by finding related work, leading tours around the San Jose mining site. Others battled alcohol and drug addiction. Mario Sepulveda, who was called Super Mario for his positive and energetic personality, admitted to fighting suicidal thoughts, saying, quote, "People saw the pictures of the rescue and they thought our hell was over. In fact, it was just beginning." And everyone's very honest at this point. Everyone's very candid. And Joe then reveals an interesting moment from his past.
Remember that day we went on an all-day session? Mary walked in, found us naked, wrestling in front of the gas fire.
That wasn't me, you bloody crackpot. That was you and Bob Carter.
Eh? Oh, yeah. Bobby Carter. Oh, yeah.
So Joe's talking about a truth that he thinks happened when Mary came home and found Joe and Jim after an all-night session naked wrestling in front of the gas fire. But Jim is of course quick to leap on this, calling him a crackpot and resolutely saying that it was Bobby Carter. And yes, we have heard of Bob Carter before. This is a nice callback to the end of Series 2, where we see Joe and Darren interact briefly. Joe very sozzled, and Joe brings up Bob Carter there. So I love that they pull this back. So Jim says it was Bobby Carter, and Joe pulls a face upon remembering this, which is not without glee, but clearly somewhat embarrassed by the whole thing. And what is the story there? I mean, naked wrestling before the fire is extremely coded, as well as just being blatantly romantic, you know. We've always said that old Joe has hidden depths that we've seen through singing and whatnot, and look, we'll see him go on tons of blind dates in the next episode, but maybe it would have been nice if old Bob Carter was there to be served by the Royals. Jim doesn't dwell on this, though, which is probably for the best. Asks Joe if he thinks he's doing the right thing with a real tone of resignation. Joe says he has to, looking off into the distance, the urn beside, and Jim just nods. He asks after Cheryl, and he says that he thinks she's having a breakdown herself, and it's sad to see that they see that in each other. Think she's having a breakdown, what with the comfort eating and that, something she puts down to an overactive thyroid, which Jim is in hysterics at. I mean, Ricky there with that amazing raspy laugh of him. I love before this too that Jim hears Joe's mention of Cheryl comfort eating with wide eyes, bemused, as if he really couldn't believe what Joe was saying.
How's Cheryl coping? Well, I think she's having a bit of a breakdown. She's comfort eating all the time. Although she insists it's an overactive thyroid.
Joe, an overactive thyroid.
It was very active last night. He cleaned out the biscuits.
Joe.
Joe then getting a good line of his own in there, saying that it was very overacted on Christmas Eve as it emptied out the biscuit tin. And an overactive thyroid, also known as hyperthyroidism or thyrotoxicosis, is where the thyroid gland produces too much of the thyroid hormones. The thyroid is a small butterfly-shaped gland in the neck, just in front of the windpipe. It produces hormones that affect things such as your heart rate and body temperature. And it's nice, for once, for Joe and Jim to share an honest joke here. They're not talking past each other, or Jim isn't scolding Joe's doe-eyed idiocy. Merely, Joe makes a funny joke and Jim laughs with him, able to appreciate a top-tier Cheryl diss. Jim then says he wishes Joe wasn't going. It was hard enough losing Mary, and he doesn't want the other two going as well. Joe says thanks for the Christmas day, Mary would have loved it. Jim agrees, breathing heavily as he does, clearly thinking of her. And Joe then paints a picture of her that pretty much everyone in this household has seen many times. Her two little cheeks all rosy red with too much sherry. He thinks of her with a Baileys in her hand, singing a song, and then he kicks into a wonderful rendition of Tura Lura Lural. In brackets, that's an Irish lullaby. Anthony and Saskia listen closely. Ant rubbing her belly. Dave gestures towards the back of the room where Joe is singing. And the song itself, well, it's a classic American song that was written in 1913 by composer James Roy Shannon for the Tin Pan Alley musical Shamin Du. The song was brought back to prominence by Bing Crosby's performance in 1944's Going My Way, and Crosby's single sold over 1 million copies and peaked at number 4 on the Billboard music charts. And of course there's a reference to this in the classic number 1 UK chart single Come On Eileen by Dexys Midnight Runners, which includes a chorus with the lines Tura, Lura, Lurai, I, and you'll hum this tune forever. So Cheryl comes in from the doorway to listen to her dad with Barb and Denise, and Peter Martin really does have such a fantastic, beautiful voice, doesn't he?
Over in Killarney, many years ago, my mother sang a song to me in tones so sweet and low. Just a simple little ditty in her good old Irish way. And I'd give the world if I could hear her sing that song today. Tooraloo, tooraloo-lie, tooraloo-raloo-ra. Hush, now don't you cry. Tooraloo-raloo-ra, tooraloo-ra-lie, tooraloo-raloo-ra. That's an Irish lullaby.
Nice that, Joe. Nice that.
Denise holds Cheryl's sleeve as they listen to the sweet sound. It's a long scene that is really given respect, and Joe is tremendous throughout. Peter Martin had a gift. Jim is all ears, listening with a respectful gaze. Joe ends the song and bows his head heavy, full of grief. Mary's urn in front of him, and Jim just says, "Nice that, Joe, nice that." And it really, really was. It's maybe his best singing moment, and then the scene fades out. And then we cut back, and we've got some drinking games afoot here at the main table. A bit of a questionable game, to be honest with you. Not that I care particularly. I'm not trying to cancel anyone or anything, but yeah. So where are we? We've got Dave, Ant, Joe and Jim, and they are mid-drinking song. They're all batting the table and chanting Azamuk Baye as Dave downs a glass. I mean, they're a right royal rabble here.
Get it down, you Zulu warrior. Get it down, you Zulu chief. As a yumba yumba yay, 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 as a yumba yumba yay.
And I'm surprised this got into the show. I mean, okay, this is fairly recently. And, this song about Zulu warriors and whatnot, I had heard this before, actually, in the In-Betweeners. And Will's reaction was kind of my reaction, really, upon watching this episode. So first up in the game is Dave, and he's got it down in 1 as the lads bash out the song on the table. He struggles a little, but it's one of many tonight, as we've seen, and it eventually goes down. And I love Ant beside him, singing and chanting in that tribal rhythm, really eyeing up Dave's pint as it pours all the way down his throat, and then everyone erupts into cheers. The juxtaposition, it must be said, of these two scenes, going from the nadir of Joe singing a mournful lullaby about his Irish love to this rapid-fire rapidity, is tremendous. It really catapults us forward into the final moments of the episode. And it's then Ant's turn being instructed as a Zulu warrior to get it all down his gullet, which he does, and puts it on top of his head. Joe holding the wine glass to his head, the table sprawled out in front of them. Ant asks if they can have another round, like he asked if he could have some more of the pomaine when Baby Davy was announced. And yet again, I like how they're finding new ways to play with these characters, rearrange them in novel shapes. I mean, we saw them behind a curtain at the start of the Golden Egg Cup, in a car, in a caravan, and now in Joe's Crackers we witness some truly unruly drinking games. And they're all so sozzled here at this point. It's wonderful. It's the gifts of the specials, really, and the fact that the show isn't in real time anymore, that they can cut forward more. You know, it's not like just one unbroken half an hour. We can go from Joe's song to what is probably 30, 45 minutes later where they're deep into this drinking game. And yes, but what about the Zulu people? Well, they're a native people of southern Africa of the Nguni. The Zulu people are the largest ethnic group and nation in South Africa, with an estimated 14.3 million people, in total of which 13.7 live in South Africa, mainly in the province of KwaZulu-Natal. So the slightly dodgy game then wraps up, and Jim then compliments Saskia, saying that Ant struck gold with her. I mean, how many kind words does Swastika get in this episode? They're all deserved, but still, there's a lot of compliments to Saskia in this one. Ant then shares the news that he just can't hide to Jim, but it turns out Dave has already told him. I mean, you can't trust Dave to begin with, but, you know, everyone's clearly quite bladdered too. The words just fell out, he said, and Jim says Barb told him also, and everyone cheers on the whole royal weddings 2 in 1 year type thing. Mince pies are then brought out. The questionable chants return in earnest, and Cheryl, with no shame and good honour, imbibes some squirty cream straight from the source. And Joe seems swept up in the spirit now, clapping his hands strongly and uttering yes as the snacks enter on a plate. Anthony with his mouth wide open in joy. We get a great Jim-ism too in the mix. Jolly old Mincios, you know, he says that laughing in a right mirthful chuckle as they come in. Calls them Minzo Pios too for good measure. All off camera.
Jolly old Minzo. Minzo Pios.
So everything is right with the world for a moment. And then, well, Saskia comes in, and Joe, of course, hits her with the congratulations.
Hey up, here she comes. Congratulations, Saskia.
Joe?
Everyone's quiet in shock. Time goes into slow motion. Cheryl pauses her seemingly endless squirty cream supping. Jim is annoyed now at Joe again, but it is deserved at this point. It's really nice the way in which he says Joe at the start, staring down at the floor, in shame almost, unable to meet Saskia's eye from shock. And old Joe, well, you know, he got mixed up, didn't he? Mixing Christmas Eve with New Year's Eve.
It's New Year's Eve, Joe.
What is?
Nothing.
This is not the right moment.
It might be the right moment.
It's got nothing to do with you, Denise. This is Anthony's moment.
This could be a nice moment.
Let Anthony pick his own moment.
He doesn't want to have his moment here. She might say no.
She's not going to say no, is she? She's up to duff, isn't she?
So how's he asking her again?
No, Dad, he's not. He hasn't asked her yet.
Well, has he got the ring, do we know?
Right. It's not exactly how I planned it, but...
Hey up.
It is about the Golden Egg Cup moment. Yes, we have some more verbal ping-pong here, as only the Royals can do. This back and forth is brilliant. It could be a nice moment, says Cheryl, mouthful of cream. And the word moment is tossed back and forth. Jim says he needs to pick his own moment. Saskia smiles, though, when she slowly realises what's happening. Jim confirming it for once and all, saying, well, she's up the duff, isn't she? And Joe dawdles again and talks about the ring and stamps down on the occasion evermore. Ant then takes charge. Says it isn't how he planned it to be, but just gets on with it. Down on one knee in front of everyone to a chorus of excited woos. Ant goes down with his Santa hat on and Dave sits between. Says it looks like the moment is happening right here. It is the moment, Barb says beside Denise, and I love Joe here, coarsely shouting through the romance, seemingly unaware.
It is the moment.
What's he doing now?
Saskia.
And Craig Cash is hysterical here, beaming wide-eyed, right at Ant's cheek, enshrined between the preggers Saskia and our Ant. Ant looks at him, noticing him immediately as he begins the proposal, and Saskia too gives him a look before saying yes. Move, you silly sod, Dave. So she pauses for a moment after Anthony asks, and nods with a yeah. With Dave interestingly getting the first hug in with both of them before Eva can actually embrace. Getting married in the morning is sung, even Cheryl joining in on such an occasion. Barbara pulls out the camera and takes lots of snaps as Get Me to the Church on Time is belted out in joyful unison. And obviously Get Me to the Church on Time is a song composed by Frederick Lowe with lyrics written by Alan J. Lerner for the 1956 classic musical My Fair Lady. Joe says congratulations, Sistika. Now, I heard that as cyst, like a cyst, cystic, Sistika. But interestingly, on iPlayer, they have Joe saying City Slicker there, which I'm pretty sure he doesn't say. I think that's a mistake, but that is really funny. And if that is the one, I love that he calls it City Slicker. So Joe was in trouble, but now no one cares, of course. And he realises that this is a big moment, and for a big moment, you need a big drink. He says it's time for Joe's Special Brandy. Everyone's G'd up at this. Dave then stands to attention. Jim asks everyone to stay quiet because Dave's got an announcement. It all goes quiet. And Dave just says he's going to the toilet again. I mean, what's the matter with him, Barbara says. And yeah, we all agree with that, Bob.
This is a moment for Joe's Special Brandy!
Excuse me, everyone.
Quiet, please.
I'm just going on the toilet again.
Bloody hell, Dave!
He's off that toilet.
So Joe leaves, Dave leaves, and Jim, still seated, says to Saskia to give her future father-in-law a hug. And in doing so, however, in reaching forward towards her as she leans in, he accidentally smashes Mary's urn straight into the ground with a loud clatter. Oh, what drama. And though Jim doesn't get any direct comeuppance in this episode, it is fitting that by feigning his disability and asking Saskia for a hug, that he inadvertently destroys the urn. Everyone is shocked, naturally. Barb tries valiantly to rescue it as much as she can, but she says it's sticking to the carpet. She's trying to get as much of the ashes as possible out of the threads with her scooped hands, but the toothpaste is sadly out the tube at this point. I mean, it's kind of nice. It's slightly morbid, but it's kind of nice to think of Mary now as eternally part of the household in some way.
Saskia, come and give your future father-in-law a little hug.
Oh, no. Look at me mum on the rug.
Get her up, quick.
Can't get her all up. She's sticking to the carpet.
Well, he's bound to notice she's not all in there.
Look at me ma on the rug, Cheryl says sadly. Barb obviously is working hard right at it, trying to scoop old Mary as best as she can, but the damage has been done, really. Denise offers that maybe they should put some scoops of Nana in to make up the difference that Joe will clearly notice, but Barb simply says don't be so disrespectful as she grabs handful and handful of the grainy granny grit. Jim says can't Barb just hoover the rest up? What, with the new Dyson, she counters, but soon obliges. And then comes possibly my favourite line of the episode.
Hurry up, Barb, we'll be back any minute.
Oh, right. Has this ever happened to you on Christmas Day, Saskia?
No.
I mean, this is as astronomical an event, really, that can ever happen. Like, of course it wouldn't have happened, to Saskia. But the fact that Denise even asks is hysterical. Saskia's probably never seen anything as insane as this, even in A&E. So poor Mary is hoovered up. The Dyson instantly tainted now. Poor Mary not in with Norma, but in with some of the ghastly carpet dirt. Denise apologises to Cheryl. Dave then hobbles down and asks dimly, what's happened? Mary's in the Dyson, Barb says. Dave doesn't quite hear her at first, though, and then when he does get it, he doesn't quite comprehend it because, yeah, it is a lot to take in when you're just back from the toilet, and especially when you're Dave. Joe then returns to the lounge with his brandy and asks, who's in the Dyson? And Barb then comes in with a godly bit of a wordplay save there, saying they never imagined Mary to die so soon, which fits remarkably nicely, actually. Joe asks about the vacuuming. Jim tries to cover it, saying she knocked an ashtray over, but Barb can't lie for long and straight away gets honest. Got something to tell you, Joe. And Barb then puts Saskia right on the spot. Do you want to tell him, Saskia? She asks. What with you being a nurse? Shitty move there. I mean, admittedly, it ain't on Barb to say either, but way to put your freshly engaged daughter-in-law in a super awkward position. And Saskia is shown not doing much, not moving much. Ant looks behind him as if to say, what the hell? Joe then notices Mary's lid is missing, glances into the empty vessel and spots that Mary herself has departed. It's tense for a few seconds. Everyone holds their breath, and Saskia, ever the medical professional, then takes charge.
There's been an accident, Joe. I'm afraid Mary's in the Dyson.
What? My Mary's in the Dyson?
Sorry, Joe.
Sorry, Joe.
Sorry, Joe.
Sorry, Joe.
Sorry, Joe.
Sorry, Joe.
Everyone's avoiding the topic as best as they can, saying sorry, and yeah, who can blame them? The reality of this situation is sort of wild, to be honest. It's not easy for Joe to take, regardless of all the alcohol. And it's Cheryl at the end who speaks the most sense, bringing it back down to reality.
Dad, she's not really in the Dyson. She's in heaven. She's gone now.
Aye. Aye.
It's a tender moment, reminding her father that spilled ashes or not, Mary is gone, and she was before that urn was ever filled or held. Joe just leans back in his chair a little and we hear it crack, it's so quiet. Says "I" and then quickly gets up and says "I" again with some pain. Where's he going? Cheryl clasps her hands in front of her and bows her head, truly upset. We can also see behind her now on the shelf 2 bottles of wine at various levels and an open crisp packet between 2 wire reindeers and a woman in a swimsuit bathing on a rock. Yeah, I've never spotted that one before. So Joe leaves and shuts the door behind him to the kitchen. We never really see that door shut, really. There's a lot of cards stuck to it on the windows. Denise pulls a face of, I don't know what to say. Ant covers his mouth. Saskia looks off into the distance in the corner of the room. The door shuts with a whiny creak and Jim quickly finds someone to blame the situation on. Saskia. Though he seems to say Saska, so it's not just Joe who messes her name up. Why did you tell him, he asks. Which, yeah, it was Barb. And it was you, really, in the first place. You know, your dirty mitts dropped Mary off the table after all. Denise actually does say Saskia too in blaming her, but Ant erupts quite fairly at this and makes the situation clear, and then the argument spills backwards as a timeline.
Mum told her to tell him. Anyway, it's your fault for knocking him off in the first place.
It's not my bloody fault, it's his bloody fault for falling on me toe in the first place.
I was fixing your tree lights.
Leave Dave out of it, Dad. It's not his fault. It's Mum's fault for dropping the frozen turkey on it in the first place.
It wasn't my fault, it was your dad's fault because he wouldn't double bag it.
If I pay for the carrier bag, it's the bloody Lycian's fault.
What's the coalition got to do with Mary being in the Dyson?
So Denise throws it to Barb, who blames it on Jim, who blames the 5p carrier bags. So it's really the coalition's fault. Amazing. The constant shirking of responsibility is expertly done, and Ant then quite rightly puts things into perspective, saying, what do Cameron and Clegg have to do with Mary in the urn? Jim then turns on the Dyson, getting at it and getting at Barb. She says she always wanted one, which you can imagine, and Jim then says, look at all the trouble it's caused. Well, the Dyson is just part of the whole fiasco, to be honest with you. It's you, Jim. Look at all the trouble you've caused. Dave then gets involved, saying he doesn't think it's a Dyson's fault. It's gratifying that he's sticking up for an inanimate object again, like with the sat-nav, in the last episode. Jim then gets into having a dead woman at the dining table at Christmas, which is kind of fair, but Barb then tries to stick up for Cheryl, but ends up upsetting her more, no doubt. Jim, do you mind, she says? That dead old woman is Cheryl's dead old mother. And Cheryl, clearly upset and uncertain, looks at Barb sadly at this. I don't think it's a statement so much that has rattled her, just the whole situation, and who can blame her, really? And Joe is suddenly back. There's so much action in these final few minutes. I love the mutters of, he's back, oh, he's back, and everyone then gets focused.
Jim, do you mind? That dead old woman is Cheryl's dead old mother.
Joe opens the door and comes in solemnly. Snowflake tiara still on his head. Cheryl asks if he's all right, and Joe then has a wonderful Christmas revelation.
You're right, love. Your mum's not in the Dyson, and she's really never been in the urn. She's in here. She's in our hearts, isn't she?
Yeah.
You know, I've been dreading Christmas without her. But I've realised one thing. I'll never be on my own while I've got you lot. That's why I went back and took this down. Because we're going nowhere, Cheryl.
Yay! Best Christmas ever! It really is Dickensian, the way that Joe suddenly has this turnaround. Certainly nothing narratively in the royal family history before has ever moved at such an unglacial pace. But it's a really uplifting, high note at the end of the episode. And yeah, it's just right them being neighbours, isn't it? It'd be sad to see them move. It doesn't make sense. And Joe, we should say, is holding the sign that was outside his house, marking it up for sale. John Rushton Estates, which doesn't actually exist. But it's powerful symbolism, isn't it? I mean, literally, they're not open at this time. It's Christmas night, but he's just bringing the thing in with him to sort of showcase the fact that they've made a decision, that he's standing behind this decision. And, it's darling, too, to think of Joe bringing the sign back into the kitchen with him, leaning against the inside door, knowing he was going to have this entrance, saying the speech, and then for the final flourish being for him to grab this sign from right out the nook. I mean, the symbolism, as I say, the very literal symbolism, it really gives some muscle to the moment. Joe with this gigantic sign. I mean, he could have just came in and said, we're not moving, Cheryl, but with so much plot to pack in during these last 90 seconds, it just helps things land a little stronger. And suddenly, Up Where We Belong by Joe Cocker and Jennifer Warnes plays. And this is, of course, the song from the closing of the classic 1982 film An Officer and a Gentleman. The song reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in the US and topped the charts in several other countries. So yes, Joe then gets his An Officer and a Gentleman on in a very funny little nod in the closing moments of this episode. So he just went home to grab his rum, returned and soon left, and he was upset again, and now he's back, with the sign, grabs Mary and the Dyson, and leaves once more. And Joe's delivery here is superb for what is quite a surreal thought, really, the fact that the ashes of his loved wife are in this Dyson, but he picks it up in a very tender, soft way. It's oddly romantic, yet still tragic, yet still uplifting and funny. It's very Royal Family.
Come on, Mary love. We're going home.
So everyone's loving this. Dave stands up and applauds. Ant can be heard laughing. It's great. Though we do see Bob looking a bit confused at all this, no doubt bewildered by the insane sequence of events that has just went down. I mean, let's just think about it, right? In the last 5 minutes, we've had Cheryl upset in the kitchen, the proposal, the urn smash, the Dyson, the return of Joe declaring he and Cheryl are staying. It's been breakneck, but it's, of course, not everything. So Jim calls Joe Joey, having a good laugh, and then, boom, we're in the final 5 seconds of the episode, and Saskia grabs her stomach. The baby. But that's literally all you get. And then the episode's done. So Saskia's seated and cheering like everyone else. And then she leans forward and clearly her waters have broken. We see Jim still feigning his injuries. It's brilliant that he never got found out. Looking shocked at Saskia. Then Ant and Denise notice and move towards her. We can see the door opening at the back of the kitchen as Joe goes, and then boom, it's done. Okay, and there you have it. There are my thoughts on Joe's crackers. Please do get in touch with me, the Royle Ramble pod. I would love to hear from you. Love to hear your review of this episode, what you think went well, what you think went wrong. Just your feedback in general, really. And what about me in general? Well, in general, I actually really like this episode. I think it's very grounded, refreshingly grounded. I mean, obviously there's a lot of absurdity flying throughout it, but I appreciate that it's in the homestead, that it brings all the characters together, that we have a lot of emotional scenes as well. We even get a little bit of narrative at the end. But it is slightly frustrating that this is not, taken up in the final episode, Barbara's Old Ring. So there is nothing about Anthony and Saskia or the new baby or whatnot. This is the last we see of Joanna Froggatt and co, which is a shame. I know they weren't planning for Barbara's Old Ring to be the final episode, as it were. There were other specials in the offing, so I'm sure it was going to be remedied there. But yeah, it would have been nice to at least hear a little bit of something about how Ant and that are getting on. But still, that is my thoughts on Joe's crackers. So as I say, the RoyleRamblePod@gmail.com. If you enjoy what we're doing over here on the Royal Family and you want to hear my thoughts on Early Doors, the first 2 episodes of the Grapes tapes are now available on Patreon. If you support on Patreon, you can download it like a normal podcast episode and get access straight away there through the app. We will be dropping an episode of the Grapes tapes every month on the same day that the Royle Ramble returns as well. So we've got lots to talk about in the future. I'll be back next month to discuss Barbara's Old Ring. And until then, follow us at Royle Ramble Pod, the email, the RoyleRamblePod@gmail.com. Go back through the archive, support on Patreon if you enjoy Early Doors or if you want to hear any other stuff we've got there as well. But yeah, enough rambling. This has been Tom Quee, the Royle Ramble. Speak soon. Bye.